Chapter 500. Faint lights seeped out from the windows of every room, accompanied by melodious music. At the top there were 4 dazzling words on the signboard, 18 heavens. Taking a closer look, the 4 words seemed to be formed by round pearls, and there was a faint rustling sound coming from them. From the flickering and changing of the stars and the faint rustling sounds, it seemed to be something Reynolds had seen before, dream beads. Of course, they couldn't all be the top-grade beads that Dragon Lady Yi had obtained at the auction. However, it was rare to see so many dream beads, and they all looked to be more than 300 to 400 years old. Parker looked at Reynolds, who was looking left and right like a newbie, and said proudly, "Mr. Dennis, is this your first time here? 18 Heavens is one of the most famous flower boats in Punglai. It's famous because of its 18-story tower. We're lucky to be able to book a room on the 9th floor." Reynolds laughed involuntarily. He had only heard of the 18 levels of hell, but he didn't expect there to be 18 heavens in the king's realm. Pi explained, "There are a total of 18 elegant rooms on the first floor of 18 heavens. For every floor, there's one room. Every floor has different types of programs and beauties, especially on the 18th floor, where there's only one room. It's said that the level of luxury is unimaginable, and there are countless exciting programs. It's a pity that we've only heard of it and don't have the right to see it for ourselves. However, Mr. Dennis doesn't need to feel regretful. There are already quite a few programs on the 9th floor. I'm sure Mr. Dennis will be overwhelmed and forget to return. The people from this world really knew how to have fun," Reynolds said. "Then I'll wait and see." The Turtle Man led the 3 of them to the bottom of the tower. Then, the 3 pretty maids at the door bowed slightly. "Ai Fu, Fan Lien, Michelle. We're honored to be able to serve our esteemed guest." Parker explained, "Mr. Dennis, these are the maids who will be our personal commentators for all the programs tonight. They're also called Yume. Other than commentating, they can also do anything for you. They've been trained for a long time and know a lot. They're very exciting." Reynolds looked at them impudently and slapped her butt. "Beauties, are you really that amazing?" Michelle was the most classy of the 3. It was obvious that Parker and Pi had specially given her to Reynolds in order to please him. "Mr. Dennis, you're so naughty," Michelle said shyly. 2 red clouds actually appeared on her face, as if she was really shy. Reynolds had to admit, whether she was pretending or not, that shy and coy look evoked his desire. Payne laughed. "Mr. Dennis, don't be fooled by her appearance. You won't even know what's going on if she eats you." The 3 women protested coquettishly, but their faces were full of innocence. Although they were all on the 9th floor of the tower, the services in the 9 rooms were different. If it was mainly for business reasons, or if it was just to enjoy singing and dancing, then the maids and programs arranged would be different. The Parker brothers were here purely to have fun. They chose the most exciting type, and even the waitresses were very slutty. Smiling sweetly, the 3 seductive beauties led Reynolds and the others up the spiral staircase to the 9th floor. The walkway was actually made of jasper, and the handrails were made of white jade. Elegance and luxury coexisted. Once they entered the room, Reynolds realized that this was a 2-way sound barrier room. Reynolds took in a deep breath. It seemed like it was going to be a night of debauchery. The room was decorated very magnificently, forming a stark contrast with the elegant exterior of the ship. Pink lanterns, pink carpet, pink gauze curtains, pink walls. Everything in sight exuded a certain atmosphere, ambiguity. The stage was circular and was set in the center of the room. It was about 300 square meters and 10 meters tall. The space was enough for the dancers to dance to their heart's content. 3 long mattresses were evenly distributed at a 60-degree angle to the stage. They were naturally the seats for Reynolds and the others. There was a protruding blue button on the right side of the table. The curious Reynolds pressed it lightly. Then, a crystal hanging 5 meters above his head spat out a small black light screen. It extended out like a piece of cloth, completely enveloping Reynolds and the table. This was a one-way sound barrier. The people outside couldn't see the people inside the barrier and their voices. Of course, they wouldn't know what they were doing inside. Pressing the button again, the black light screen quickly disappeared, and the barrier was removed. There were several pots of sea orchids on the windowsill. The room was filled with the smell of perfume, whetting one's appetite. Parker and his brother couldn't help but touch Yume's body. However, they didn't go overboard because the best part was yet to come. If they were to indulge too much now, it would be like Zhu Beiji eating ginseng fruit. It wouldn't be tasty at all. Although their big ears were very similar to Zhu Beiji's, their wisdom and patience were worlds apart. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to become successful businessmen. Reynolds hugged his Yume and sat down on the soft mattress without standing on ceremony. The table in front of them was already filled with a dazzling array of delicacies. There were fruits and seafood, fragrant wine, and other entertainment for the guests. The door was locked tightly, and there seemed to be no opening around the walls. Also, knowing that this room was suspended in midair, how did the performers get in? Just as Reynolds was feeling puzzled, the stage lit up, and a white pillar of light soared into the sky. Then, the figures of 12 white-clothed women suddenly appeared in front of everyone like a mirage. They gradually became clearer, and when the white light dissipated, they had become real people. Reynolds was enlightened. So it was a transmission array. Damn it. It was indeed extravagant. The performers were actually using a small transmission array to kill a chicken with a butcher's knife. They were making a mountain out of a molehill. Of course, the guests' interest was also proportional to the rarity of the item. The boss of 18 Heavens understood people's psychology very well, so he spared no expense for this. Raging flames shot out from dozens of small holes around the stage. Under the light of the flames, the 12 white-clothed women took off their clothes. Their hair, eyebrows, pupils, faces, lips, nails, and every part of their bodies were snow-white. There was even a faint cold mist coming from their bodies. The entire stage. Not long after, the entire room was covered in mist. The mist lingered, and the entire room was like the moon palace where Chang-Yi lived. It was actually slightly cold. It was different from the usual dancers who smiled sweetly to win the favor of the guests. Their beautiful faces were as cold as ice, and they were extremely arrogant. In contrast to their demeanor, the translucent white clothes on their bodies were faintly discernible, and they were extremely sexy and alluring. Smart women knew that showing 70% of their bodies was the most alluring, and it was even more intimidating than being completely naked. Moreover, their cold and elegant appearance could easily attract men to conquer them. Chapter 501. This appetizer was not bad. Reynolds felt that he was in a daze, but he didn't lose his composure. The table was semicircular, surrounding the two people on the couch. The Parker brothers and the white-clothed woman, who were more than 20 meters away, couldn't see too much. However, with them present, they were secretly playing tricks on the couch, which was obviously a lot more exciting. Melodious music floated in the air. It was refreshing and natural. The lady in white danced along with it. The satin in her hands fluttered, making her look like a fairy. Although she was teasing, Michelle still had to do her job. She rubbed her hands on Reynolds's legs and said, "Mr. Dennis, this dance is called Goddess Longs for Mortals. As the name suggests, it's about a young goddess in the heavens who fell in love and came down to the mortal world to find her ideal husband." Michelle didn't explain much. There was no point in explaining too much. She mainly left it for the audience to figure out. Reynolds nodded. Yes. However, his eyes didn't leave the dancers in front of him. Michelle pursed her lips and smiled. That's right. But I have to remind Mr. Dennis that these are all beauties of the Frost tribe. Their bodies are naturally cold, especially that part of their bodies. It might freeze you to death. Reynolds's eyes widened. No way. There's such a thing? Wouldn't that kill me? Michelle giggled. If you don't believe me, Mr. Dennis can try it later. Reynolds sat on the seat of the train and watched with interest as a rather cute young lady played with her mobile phone opposite him. Since there were only a few people in the carriage, and it was empty, Reynolds could only look at her. She had long hair that draped over her shoulders, a delicate and cute face and ample breasts. Her legs, which were clad in white silk, were crossed together. She should be a torturous little vixen. Although she was wearing headphones, he could tell that this lady was playing Mobile Legends. When did this Levi come? Damn, why did I die again? Whoa, brother Levi, let me go QAQ. It's my first time playing Sun Shangxiang. I tricked you, sorry. Furthermore, Reynolds had confirmed 3 things. First, she was playing Sun Shangxiang. Second, she was playing the game with her voice turned on. Third, the game was over. Reynolds couldn't help but smile when he saw the young lady put down her phone and let out a long sigh. Her face was filled with hidden bitterness. Humph, I don't believe it. Seeing that she had started another round, Reynolds shook his head and reminded her, Hey, the train in front has to pass through a cave, and there's also a large area of wilderness. There won't be any signal, so it's best not to play. Apparently, this young lady did not expect Reynolds to speak to her. At this moment, he only glanced at Reynolds with slight surprise. Reynolds also knew that he wasn't the kind of person who looked handsome at first glance. Reynolds knew what he looked like. She had expected his reaction, so Reynolds didn't say anything. He just gave her a kind reminder. What happened after that had nothing to do with him. But I've already opened it. Unexpectedly, the young lady didn't ignore Reynolds. Instead, she pitifully said another sentence. Reynolds looked at her in surprise. She thought that Reynolds didn't believe her, so she got up and sat beside him, holding the phone in front of him. You see, this is a promotion match. You're only 1 star away from Diamond. You can't lose. What came to his face was a faint fragrance on her body. It was the lemon smell that Reynolds liked. Moreover, it turned out to be an iPhone fork. This young lady is quite rich. Reynolds looked at the screen and silently complained in his heart. Which character is you? Reynolds looked at the game loading interface and asked. Irene. It's that Wang Zhaojun. Irene? Reynolds took the phone and looked at the screen. Wang Zhaojun was wearing the I Am a Singer skin. The nickname below was indeed Irene, and there was an eye-catching Aristocratic 8 logo next to it. What a rich girl. Reynolds thought to himself. Aristocratic 8 seemed to cost 5,000 yuan. For a poor college student like him, who only lived on 1,000 yuan a month, it was really a big gap. Reynolds asked casually, Irene? Miss Irene, is that your real name? Yes, is there a problem? Looking at the young lady's puzzled face, Reynolds couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect that there would be people who used their own names in this game. What's wrong? What are you smiling about? Reynolds said, I'm smiling. Your lineup is sure to win. You have Wang Zhaojun as the mid-laner, Lanling Wang as the jungler, Zhang Fei as the support, Neza as the top laner, and Di Renjie as the bottom laner. This lineup not only has super gank ability, but also super survival ability. Clearing his throat, Reynolds continued, look at the lineup on the other side. Daji as the mid laner, Han Xian as the jungler, Bianca as the support, Huang Zhong as the archer, and Kyo Tachibana as the top laner. They were practically a kitchen knife team. This kind of team had a high tolerance for mistakes. Moreover, most of them were heroes in the early stages of the game. None of them were tanks in the later stages of the game. All we had to do was to target Huang Zhong and make sure that he didn't dare to set up a cannon. However, we have to be careful of Bianca in the early game. This season, Bianca's early game damage is number 1. No one can beat him. Reynolds wanted to continue, but he glanced at Irene, who was sitting beside him, and realized that she was looking at him with stars in her eyes. You're so good. What's your rank in Challenger? Do you still need a disciple? Reynolds looked at Irene's admiring eyes and smiled. My rank is only Star Glory 1. Like you, I'm 1 star away from promotion. You're so good, QAQ. After this round, can we add each other as friends? Looking at Irene's expectant eyes, Reynolds could only nod. He had to admit that the loading speed of the iPhone was really fast. He was the first one to reach 100%. Welcome to Challenger's Glory. With a mechanical female voice, the game officially started. Reynolds also focused on controlling Wang Zhaojun to start the game. Lanling Wang, leave a red for me. Direnjian no. Lanling Wang, F*CKU. Han Xin on the other side, I'm here to kill a bunch of teammate. Bianca on the other side, Welfare Bureau. Reynolds didn't care about these words. He just laughed and didn't do anything. First, he bought a pair of shoes that cost 250 gold coins and walked to the bushes on the right side of the middle lane. One had to know that the 3 bitches of the grass were not called for nothing. Dodgy, Angela, and Wang Zhaojun were 3 heroes who loved to squat in the grass to ambush others. Often, they could take down a hero on the other side with 1 set of skills. Then, they would hide in the grass, hide their achievements and reputation, and prepare to ambush the next person. Chapter 502. Reynolds knew this very well. Since he had bought the shoes, he would definitely reach the bushes before Dodgy and get the chance to attack first. As expected, Dodgy was late. She hid under the tower and waited for a while. After confirming that there was no one around, she carefully came over to clear the troop. Reynolds hid in the bushes and watched Dodgy clear the troops while keeping an eye on the enemy hero. Hit her! Hit her! Aaron could not help but urge him. Reynolds shook his head and said, Don't rush. Wait until Dodgy uses at least one of her skills. You have to use all of Wang Zhaojun's skills. Oh, Aaron heard this and obediently shut her mouth. Reynolds walked back and forth in the bushes. When he saw Dodgy use a skill, he quickly swiped the screen with his right hand and used a second skill at Dodgy's feet. Reynolds's right hand quickly attacked Dodgy as he walked towards her. Dodgy's health bar was dropping at a speed visible to the naked eye. Reynolds had already controlled Wang Zhaojun to walk in front of Dodgy, almost touching her face. At this time, Dodgy's frozen status had been removed. She was in a panic and did not have the heart to fight back. She was afraid that someone would sneak up on her and kept retreating. Reynolds had also reached level 2. He immediately used a skill. Shattered ice flowers bloomed under Dodgy's feet and Dodgy's speed was reduced instantly. Reynolds's right hand did not stop and continued to attack her. Dodgy's health was already reduced by more than half. Dodgy had no choice but to use a second skill and hit Wang Zhaojun. Crack! The shield on Wang Zhaojun's body exploded instantly. At the same time, Dodgy's health was reduced to a critical level. Flash! Dodgy was forced to use Flash by Reynolds. While Wang Zhaojun was temporarily stunned, she immediately went under the tower. Reynolds did not care. His right hand also used Flash. A thin golden light flashed. Just as Reynolds was about to use Flash to take the first hit, a red 460 delay appeared on the top right corner of his phone. There's no signal. We should be entering the cave soon. Reynolds frowned as he put down his phone and said to Aaron. Aaron stomped her feet and said angrily, Broken signal? That was such a cool maneuver just now. How come there's no signal? So infuriating. Reynolds smiled and said, Don't worry, it's okay to lose this game. Let's add each other as friends later, and I can carry you in the future. Reynolds naturally wouldn't reject such a beautiful girl. Maybe they could develop some ambiguous things in the future. Aaron became happy after hearing Reynolds's words. The train entered the cave at this time, and the carriage immediately became incomparably dark. Although there was light, it was still very depressing. The two of them chatted as they waited for their phones to receive a signal. Reynolds found out that Irene was a university student just like him. She was also taking the train home because of the winter break. The two of them quickly became familiar with each other and memorized each other's phone numbers. By this time, the train had already left the cave, but the scenery outside the window was getting more and more desolate. Although it was daytime, Reynolds could feel a chilling aura. Moreover, the train had already left the cave for quite a while, and there was still no signal. He didn't even have 2G, let alone 4G. It directly showed that it was not within the range of receiving information. Reynolds felt a little strange. After all, he often took this train home, so he was very clear about whether there was a signal on the road or not. Just as he was feeling strange, Irene patted him and asked carefully, "Did you notice that these two trains are getting slower and slower?" Reynolds was startled and looked out of the window. The train was really getting slower and slower. The two of them looked at each other and looked at the scenery outside the window. Their expressions became more and more frightened. Because, unknowingly, it was no longer the wilderness outside the window. Instead, it was a large pile of broken corpses. Reynolds asked curiously, "Who is it? Could it be that butterfly demon?" "Haha, then come to my room tonight, let's have a good chat." After saying that, he smiled and was very happy. The cold butterfly demon girl from before walked over and deliberately pulled the hem of her short skirt, revealing a white and tender thigh, and said teasingly, "Okay, Mr. Dennis. Unfortunately, that person is not me." Thinking of the kind of night he spent in 18 Heavens, Reynolds's mouth was a little dry. How come after not seeing them for more than 10 days, they were all so proactive? Black-faced ghost. Reynolds could tell who it was just by this name. Sure enough, Yi flew out of the courtyard the next moment. He said to the girls, "Ling you can go and cook first." The girls knew that he had something to discuss with Yi in private, so they all left first. Yi quickly arrived in front of him and anxiously said, "You're back, I was worried to death." Reynolds thought to himself, "What are you worried about? Father isn't your husband." "Look, I've become a lot smaller," she said as she stuck out her chest, showing it to Reynolds. Reynolds almost fell down. This kind of woman was really rare. If her father wasn't Mike Searle, he would have given her away sooner or later. He knew that this was a normal reaction from the medicine, so he casually said, "Don't make a fuss, I'll give you some medicine and you'll be fine." Yi heard that she wouldn't return to her original form and let out a big sigh of relief. Reynolds's heart skipped a beat. "That's right, Miss Yi. Is there any way to become an Aquilan citizen, get a occupation badge, and get a high-level position?" Yi said in a surprised voice. "You still want power?" Reynolds laughed. "No matter what, I'm still a person with a bit of fame, but I don't even have a occupation badge in Aquilan. That's a bit embarrassing." Yi didn't have any schemes and didn't doubt it. "There is. The first is to make a large contribution to the Empire, so you can get a high-level position. The second is to participate in Aquilan's annual sea hunt." "Sea hunt?" Yi said with a nod. "That's right, the sea hunt is also a tradition of our empire. Because Aquilan is a trading country, the smell of commercialization is too strong. In order to prevent people's sense of martial arts from being weakened, the Empire will hold some competitions each year. The sea hunt is the most important one and lasts for a month, like a festival. Warriors that perform well in the sea hunt will be used by the Empire." Seeing a glimmer of hope, Reynolds was very excited as he asked, "What's the specific content?" "Listening to the name, it doesn't seem like a duel between warriors, right?" Yi shook her head. "No, it's hunting demonic sea beasts." Reynolds was a bit scared when he heard this. Fierce beasts, isn't that dangerous? Of course it is. Chapter 503. Ferocious beasts were also a type of magical beast, but they were much more ferocious than ordinary magical beasts and had a violent temperament. The glove, nimble movement, that the pervert Philip had given him, which could greatly increase the speed at which he released spiritual power, was made from the belly of sea demon bandies. It was a pity that too many people had seen it in the Academy tournament, so he could not use it again. Otherwise, his identity would be easily exposed. Townsend rolled her eyes. Nonsense, do you think it's as simple as killing 2 water arrow prawns? If it was easy, who wouldn't climb up already? Seeing Reynolds shrink back, she gave a snort and said, "Black-faced ghost, if you're afraid, then give up on the idea and obediently be a profiteer." Ever since he had been chased, Reynolds' desire to win had become very strong. Hearing Townsend say that he was a coward, his heart filled with anger. But he said with a faint smile, "Who says I'm afraid? Miss Townsend, how about you give me some pointers and see if I have the qualifications?" Townsend said without any hesitation, "All right." She was thinking that this black-faced ghost actually dared to take the initiative to challenge her. Let this miss show off a few moves and scare him until he loses control of his body. Otherwise, who knows what an expert is? Speaking of which, she was not one of those vicious female demons who relied on the old man's power. She was very strong and was very famous in Acolin. Her family's most famous blood inheritance, true dragon spirit energy, had already reached the 5th layer. She was one of the top figures of the younger generation. She proudly said, "You just came back, so you must be very tired. To be fair, you should rest for a night. Let's fight tomorrow, I'll definitely make you convinced." Reynolds laughed. "All right, then it's settled." Townsend thought of something and quickly said, "After you lose, you can't hold a grudge, and you can't do anything to the medicine you gave me." She was quite bad *SS, directly giving Reynolds a death sentence. Reynolds laughed. "Okay. Do I look like that kind of person to you?" Townsend said with a frown, "Okay." Reynolds explained, "It means there's no problem." Therefore, the duel between the two was decided just like that. In order to let more people see his little brat, Townsend spread the news to everyone at night. He told Irene, Helena, and the other girls, and asked them to go and watch the show. Reynolds didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Speaking of which, it would be embarrassing to lose in front of Aaron, who had always admired him. He knew that Townsend was very powerful. Since he couldn't use the upgraded version of his innate skill and Randolph Storm kill, there was an 80% to 90% chance that he would lose. The next morning, they went to the tunnel stadium in the city and rented the most powerful spirit-suppressing barrier. As long as it was activated, the power of the people inside the barrier would be reduced to 1/10 of their normal power, but the toughness would not change. This way they could effectively prevent casualties. Of course, the rent was also very expensive. The fee was calculated in seconds because maintaining this barrier required too much crystal stone energy. As soon as Reynolds stepped into the spirit-suppressing barrier, he felt a heavy pressure invading his body from all directions. In fact, it wasn't the gravity that increased, but the spiritual power in his body was greatly suppressed. Only people who were used to power would have an illusion. Townsend was very confident. In her eyes, Reynolds could only be the one being taken advantage of. Thinking of how she was taken advantage of by his gaze during the breast enhancement process, she had to take revenge now. There were only Irene and Helena in the audience, and they were the two people that Reynolds trusted the most. If they chose the tunnel stadium, they would be able to avoid Maxell's surveillance to a certain extent. Reynolds also secretly asked Irene to set up a large number of scouting puppets to ensure that nothing would go wrong. For the sake of fairness, both of them wore Taoist robes with the same defensive power. They were barefoot and had wide sleeves, and they looked a bit like karate practitioners on Earth. Townsend was quite handsome and cool, and she looked like a domineering flower. Conquering such a woman was the most interesting, but it was a pity that even someone as bold as Reynolds didn't dare to do it, because she wasn't an ordinary woman. Her father could consign him to eternal damnation at any time. Lin Ling and the other girls were watching the battle with great interest in their seats on the side of the double barrier. Although they also knew that Reynolds, who couldn't show his true strength, didn't have a high chance of winning, He had always had a lot of strange tricks, and no one dared to predict the result. Townsend didn't use the bone whip as a weapon. She was barehanded, and her Taoist robes fluttered without wind. Her eyes were shining with golden light. This was the sign of the second level of the true dragon's spiritual power, the fearless golden dragon. This was the limit of what she could do under the spirit-suppressing barrier. Townsend didn't know how to hide her strength and bide her time. She just wanted to defeat Reynolds in one fell swoop. She quickly got into position. "Let's start." Reynolds laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'll do some preparatory exercises first." Then he slowly twisted his neck and loosened his bones and joints, but there was an endless "kacha, kacha" sound. He hadn't fought for a long time, and his body was almost rusty. Townsend was obviously an impatient person. Seeing that he was slow, she kept urging, "Blackface, hurry up, hurry up." However, Reynolds was very patient with the prelude. After nearly 5 minutes, he finally stood up. Townsend said helplessly, "Is this okay?" "Okay." Reynolds also got into position. He didn't like to use weapons, so naturally he was barehanded. Townsend heard this and raised the true dragon's spiritual power again. The golden light in her eyes reappeared. "Blackface, be careful." "Oh, right." Reynolds suddenly made a stop gesture. "I have a question." Townsend was startled, and the spiritual power in her body faded again. "What?" Reynolds said unhurriedly, "We have to agree on the rules." Townsend was obviously a violent person. "What rules?" "Whoever falls down and can't get up loses." Reynolds smiled and said, "If I go too far and get injured by you, Miss Townsend, I won't be able to recover in 8 to 10 days. It doesn't matter if it affects the business, but what if I can't refine the medicine you need?" Townsend thought for a moment and realized that it made sense. "Then tell me what you want. First of all, if you fall out of the arena, you lose immediately. Second, you can use any combat methods and attacks without any restrictions. Third, if either party admits defeat, the other party can't continue the battle." These 3 rules were almost all unfair rules that Renaud had personally set for himself. If he fought them head-on, he would lose without a doubt, and the chances of Townsend being kicked out of the arena would be much higher, just like in the battle with Washlaki. If he admitted defeat verbally, he would be able to avoid getting hurt. Reynolds knew that he couldn't hurt Townsend, and he knew that. Townsend said without thinking, "Okay, okay, okay. I'll do as you say. Is that all?" "That's right." Chapter 504. All right, then let's begin. Townsend began to use her true dragon's spiritual energy again. It was a pity that Reynolds stopped her once again. Townsend was about to faint. Her aura had been interrupted 3 times, so she was very annoyed. "What is it now?" Reynolds giggled as he said, "It's too boring to fight like this without any stakes. How about we make a bet?" Townsend saw that her hormones were about to go out of control. "What bet?" "Miss Townsend, if you lose, you'll have to ask your father to recommend me to the sea hunt." This was because Reynolds had heard from her that for outsiders without Aquilan nationality to participate in the sea hunt, there had to be someone who could recommend them. Townsend never thought that she would lose to this black-faced ghost. She didn't even ask what Reynolds would do if he lost and immediately agreed. "All right." Then, when she mentioned the true dragon's spiritual energy for the 4th time, she swore that if Reynolds talked like a girl again, she would beat him up without a care for anything else. But this time it really began and Reynolds had achieved his goal. Fighting was the same as fighting, 1 would be fierce, 2 would be exhausted, and 3 would be weak. Townsend's aura and fighting spirit had already been blocked, so she wasn't as fierce as before. With her condition dropping, the strength she could use would also decrease, so Reynolds' chances of winning would be much higher. With a thought, spiritual energy surged through his body and Reynolds changed from his usual wretched appearance to a majestic one. Looking at Reynolds, who seemed like a different person, Townsend thought to herself, This black-faced ghost actually has some strength. No wonder he dared to challenge me, but this young miss is stronger." Her slender feet stomped on the ground and she flew straight up. Two golden dragon heads with their mouths wide open appeared in her hands. She slammed them towards Reynolds with a faint dragon roar that could shake one's mind. Reynolds used his most proficient spiritual energy weapon, a fire hammer, to smash the dragon heads. With a quang sound, Reynolds' fire hammer shattered and the dragon heads only paused for a moment before continuing forward. This move was called Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore and could shatter metal and stone. Even if Reynolds' spiritual energy weapon's elemental density was unparalleled in the world, he still couldn't contend against it. Reynolds had already expected this result and immediately retreated. With one strike, Townsend was very proud. A golden light flashed from her butt, but it was a dragon tail. It wasn't a part of Townsend's body, but rather something formed from spiritual energy. Reynolds fled to the left, but when Townsend caught up, he quickly turned to the right, trying to use inertia to shake her off. However, the dragon tail beneath Townsend's feet also swayed along with it. In an instant, he had already urgently changed directions and continued to chase after Reynolds. The Dragon Clan's light body technique was also very famous. This move, called Divine Dragon Swings Its Tail, could change direction very quickly. It was very difficult for the opponent to get rid of it, and it was very easy for the opponent to be suppressed to the point of suffocation. Although Townsend was impulsive and hot-tempered, he was a smart man in battle. He knew that Reynolds's spiritual power was not as good as his, so he used Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore and Divine Dragon Swings Its Tail to force Reynolds to fight. It was also a common tactic for the strong to bully the weak, just like Vashlaki. Reynolds was flustered, and after a while, intentionally or unintentionally, he retreated to the edge of the arena. Townsend was not stupid. He hesitated for a moment. Could it be that his opponent wanted to lure him to the side of the field, dodge in a hurry, and then knock him out from behind? However, Townsend soon let go of her worries because she had absolute confidence in her light body technique and spiritual power. At least, she wouldn't lose to this black-faced ghost. Reynolds stretched out a fire sword in each hand and cut down the golden dragon head in the dragon girl's hand. Townsend was overjoyed when he saw this. This black-faced ghost was really stupid. He knew that it was an egg hitting a rock, but he still did such a stupid thing. If he dodged, there was at least a 10% chance. The dragon head in her hand continued to hit Reynolds's shoulder. She didn't dare to attack his chest, so as not to injure him seriously. Reynolds showed a sinister smile. When the fire sword was about to collide with the dragon head, it quickly softened and then turned into a fire whip. It wrapped around Townsend's wrist and pulled up forcefully. Townsend's Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore flew over Reynolds's left and right shoulders. Townsend was caught off guard by this strange move. The middle door was wide open and she couldn't stop it. She crashed straight over in a scream. She reacted fast enough. She immediately covered her whole body with the golden body protection dragon aura, trying to knock Reynolds out of the field. Reynolds let go of the whip in his hand, but grabbed her right arm and turned around. His back was to Townsend. It was a taboo in battle to give one's back to the enemy like this. It was the first time Townsend had seen such a strange move. However, she soon found out the role of this move, borrowing force to fight force. Spirit Bind Shoulder Throw. In the spinning sky and earth, Townsend's strength was used by Reynolds instead. In the spinning sky and earth, she fell out of the field with 3 slow ropes tied to her body. She didn't know when Reynolds got them. It was well known that protective spiritual power was much weaker than ordinary skills in defense of binding skills. In addition, Reynolds's slow ropes were made of super-condensed spiritual power and were not easy to break free. Seeing that Townsend was about to fall to the ground, Reynolds smiled proudly. There was a soft couch under the field, and the dragon girl's spiritual power was strong. He didn't have to worry about her falling and getting a concussion. Unfortunately, he was happy too early. A few golden dragons suddenly emerged from Townsend's body. They opened their mouths and were bitten off by the slow ropes and then retracted. Reynolds was shocked. Life protection spiritual power? Like the active protection spiritual power, the life protection spiritual power was an extremely rare defensive spiritual power. It was related to the bloodline of each race. Other races' life items may be different, but the dragon's life item must be a dragon. Therefore, Reynolds recognized it at a glance. Townsend spat out a golden balloon from her hands. When it hit the ground, it bounced back like a rubber ball. She flipped her body, gently touched the ball, and rushed back into the field again. If he used solid ice power, Reynolds had some confidence that she wouldn't be able to return to the stage, just like Vaslaki. However, he couldn't expose his ice spiritual power at this moment, so he had to give up. Townsend was too arrogant and had almost been defeated by Reynolds in the first round. He was a little angry and did not hold back. After landing on the ground, he clapped his hands. 8 gray chi wriggled under the dojo and surrounded him. Reynolds was slightly surprised. It was the first time he saw Townsend use a real dragon's spiritual power of a second color. He didn't dare to face it head-on and flew back. However, the gray energy was faster and soon surrounded him in all directions. Reynolds saw this and quickly jumped up high. However, at this time, 8 earth dragons on the ground quickly roared and went behind Reynolds. They used their heads and tails to hit his body towards Townsend like a baseball. His whole body shook, but it wasn't as painful as imagined. Townsend's 8 earth dragons' spiritual power was mainly used to maintain the speed and drive the escapee back. The real killer was the master in front. Seeing that Renault was flying towards him while waving his arms and legs, unable to change his direction in the air, Townsend was pleased with himself. Black-faced ghost, let's see if you'll lose this time. She used her dragon power. Chapter 505. Reynolds, who had been very flustered and seemed to be at a loss, suddenly stopped his meaningless actions when the distance between the two was only 6 or 7 meters. At this time, he was calm and collected, without a trace of panic. He raised his hands, thumbs up, and the other 3 fingers connected with his palms. Huh! Townsend was a little confused, because she had never seen this kind of strange move before. She had seen the special property of Reynolds's spirit bind shoulder throw just now, so she was a little afraid. She didn't know what it would be this time. However, her family's true dragon chi was invincible, and could even contend with dark spiritual power. Townsend believed that people with weaker spiritual power than her would not be able to take advantage of her in a head-on fight. If one observed carefully, they would find that Reynolds's gesture was very similar to pulling the trigger of a gun, and the next moment, he actually laughed slyly and said, "Bang!" Of course, there were no pistols in the king's realm, but with his shout, a thin needle of fire energy came out from the tip of his index finger, and pierced towards Townsend more fiercely than a bullet. A flying type of needle spiritual power? This was the first time she heard that the extremely demanding needle spiritual power could actually be used as a flying type skill. Townsend was shocked. This pervert was attacking her vital point, her chest that was gradually developing with great difficulty. If it was pierced, who knew what the consequences would be? Townsend was worried, and she didn't dare to say that her true dragon spiritual power would be able to completely break the needle spiritual power. She could only give up on the target and quickly dodge, so Reynolds avoided a certain defeat. Townsend missed a great opportunity, and said with shame, anxiousness, and anger, You pervert." Reynolds thought proudly, but he said, "Miss Townsend, didn't we agree a moment ago? I can use any attack means and moves, and you also agreed." Townsend was speechless. She had fallen into this guy's trap, but she couldn't say anything. Damned profiteer. Damned profiteer, Townsend cursed a dozen times in her heart, and then said in a flustered and exasperated manner, "Okay, I want you to be convinced." As soon as her voice fell, a black three-tailed three-headed dragon with the same body as a face emerged from her palm with a roar. Its eyes were glaring angrily. With one look, one could tell that this was a ferocious move. It was obvious that she was serious. Townsend's face was covered with frost. Without saying a word, she drove the three-headed dragon to attack Reynolds. She was so proud and arrogant that she had been frustrated twice. She had to take down this hateful profiteer in front of her as soon as possible to relieve the anger in her heart. Otherwise, she would soon have a hormonal imbalance. Reynolds used the same trick again, sending out the needles to neutralize her attack, but this time it did not work. The speed and flexibility of Townsend's three-headed dragon was comparable to that of an earth dragon. With a sweep of its tail, it had already swept away the two spiritual needles, and its power was also as strong as the frightening dragon hits the shore. Reynolds couldn't compare to Townsend in terms of strength, and he couldn't use all sorts of unimaginable ice elemental skills. Furthermore, he also couldn't use Magic Blast and Tornado Kill. Reynolds was also unhappy about this. Otherwise, he might have been able to contend with Townsend. After all, he was once a rising star of Blue Moon. He wasn't much weaker than Townsend, and he might even be stronger. But now, he could only be forced into a corner by this shrewish woman. When Townsend saw that he could not resist, she became even more unforgiving and attacked him like a storm. Finally, she saw that Reynolds had stopped moving, and she hesitated. Once this guy showed an abnormal situation, it was very likely that there was something strange going on. Of course, Townsend could not give up such a good opportunity. She focused all her attention and drove the three-headed dragon to fly towards him. Seeing that her ferocious move was getting closer and closer to Reynolds, Townsend was overjoyed. However, at this moment, Reynolds loudly said, "I admit." Townsend forcibly stopped her attack and walked towards Reynolds. She said with a proud expression, "Admit defeat?" Reynolds had a strange smile on his face. He spread out his hand, and a bag of white powder immediately covered Townsend. The dragon girl was caught off guard and immediately took it all. She closed her eyes and exclaimed, "Dennis, what are you doing?" Reynolds laughed and said, "I didn't admit defeat. I just wanted to say, I'm serious, be careful." Townsend was furious. "You cheated." At this time, Reynolds had already slipped away like a thief. Townsend, who was in a rage, was about to use her true dragon's spiritual power when she suddenly felt itchy all over, as if she was bitten by insects. The situation was the same as Leon's that day, but the effect was much weaker. Townsend did not know what this was, but she endured the itch and chased after it. Unfortunately, her spiritual power was too chaotic, and her power was greatly reduced. Reynolds easily dodged left and right, and he even provoked her. "Miss Townsend, you should admit defeat. If you admit defeat, I will give you the antidote." Townsend was about to explode with anger. She gritted her teeth and chased after this profiteer without saying a word. However, it did not take long for the itch to spread all over her body. Townsend finally could not bear it and used her hands to scratch her body. Reynolds saw that the victory was in his hands, but he did not take the opportunity to attack. From afar, he said, "Miss Townsend, you should admit defeat. You can suffer less." However, Townsend was stubborn and refused to admit defeat. Under his shameless means, she was unwilling to say the two words, "admit defeat." Reynolds couldn't bear it anymore. Just as he was about to give the man some face and let her go, he heard a paw sound. Townsend's Taoist robe and underwear were torn apart by her too much force. Her pair of small white bunnies suddenly popped out. Townsend was stunned, so was Reynolds. Lin Ling and the other girls watching the battle were also stunned. For a moment, the training hall was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. A woman's pride and her private parts appeared in front of a man without any concealment. The dragon girl's private parts were so white and flawless. Below the left one, a heart-shaped cinnabar mole was particularly eye-catching. After at least 5 seconds, Townsend reacted. She pulled up her torn clothes to cover the important parts and said in a trembling voice, What did you see?" Reynolds answered stupidly, "Mole." Then he realized that he was too stupid. He coughed and said, "No, I didn't see anything. I mean, you are a very, very ambitious girl." He seemed to be a little incoherent and did not know how to deal with the situation in front of him. Dragon Lady's last bit of hope was shattered, and she started crying. Reynolds suddenly panicked and hurried to her. He took out a bag of antidote from his arms and handed it to her. "I admit defeat, Miss Townsend, you win." At this point, no matter how shameless he was embarrassed to take advantage of the situation. Townsend took the antidote from his hand. When she let go, the clothes on her chest fell down again. At close range, it was a super close-up. It was more stimulating than human body art. Reynolds's nose was about to bleed. Chapter 506. Townsend was filled with shame and anger. She slapped him while crying, "Black-faced ghost, I hate you." Then she quickly ran to the changing room in the training hall. Reynolds covered his burning face and couldn't get angry. He was more ashamed and uneasy. He didn't think that things would get out of hand and it would be hard to clean up. Lin Ling and the other girls looked at each other. After a while, they came over and said, "Dennis, Mr. Dennis, are you all right?" Reynolds said dejectedly, "I'm fine." But his heart was filled with worry. If Townsend ran home to tell on him, then everything would be over. Not to mention a meteoric rise. He wouldn't even have a place to stay in Acolin. The perfect plan that had been drawn up a long time ago, the smooth road and the blueprint that he had imagined, suddenly shattered into pieces like fragile glass. When Reynolds returned home, he didn't see Townsend. Reynolds's heart became even more worried and he began to consider if he should run away. Thinking about how Dragon King Mike Zelka, who loved his third daughter Townsend, would use the 10 greatest tortures of the Qing dynasty to cut him into 17 or 18 pieces and throw him into the sea to feed the fish, Reynolds's body trembled. However, to give up the foundation that he had worked so hard to build and run away to start all over again, this was easier said than done. After 3 days of fear, Reynolds was absent-minded and had a tasteless meal in the inner court when Townsend suddenly appeared. Her eyes were red like she had been crying for 3 days. Reynolds threw his bowl down and went up to her. He begged with a crying face, "Miss Townsend, great aunt, please be magnanimous and forgive me this time. I deserve to die, I'm despicable and shameless, I'm a slut, I'm not human. But Lin Ling and the others are good friends with you, so please don't let your father know about this. Otherwise I'm dead. As for how you want to punish me to appease your anger, that's up to you." Reynolds saw that things had taken a turn for the better. He quickly told Lin Ling and the others to beg for mercy. Lin Ling and the other girls were all clever people. Without Reynolds' reminder, they all went to Townsend's side to comfort her and beg for mercy. After the girls finished speaking, Townsend pointed at Reynolds and slowly said, "I want you to marry me right now." These words were like hundreds of thunderbolts striking Reynolds's heart at the same time. He stammered, "Miss Townsend, you really know how to joke, ha." But he was even more panicked inside. Could it be that her endurance was too weak, and she had gone crazy after receiving such a heavy blow? If that was the case, he would be dead for sure. Moreover, he would die without a complete corpse. The women also looked at Townsend in astonishment, finding it hard to believe. Looking at Dragon Lady's serious expression, Reynolds couldn't laugh anymore. He asked, "Miss Townsend, may I know the reason?" Townsend coldly spat out, "Because you saw the mole under my left breast. When I was 6 years old, I swore to the dragon sovereign that the first person to see it other than my father would be my husband. Reynolds almost fainted. Just because of this simple reason? He immediately thought of journey to the west. With a dry cough, Reynolds continued, but we don't seem to have any feelings for each other. Townsend still said, you saw the mole under my left breast. Reynolds said, I'm a despicable and shameless profiteer. I can't afford to compensate you, Miss Townsend. Townsend said, you saw the mole under my left breast. Reynolds, after a series of questions and answers, Reynolds was sure of one thing. Townsend was very shrewish on the surface, but she was one of the most conservative women in the king's realm. Just like the women in ancient times on earth, as long as they were seen with their bodies, they would not marry anyone other than a soldier, whether they liked it or not. Therefore, such an incredible change occurred. Although her temper was a bit bad, Reynolds had to admit that Townsend was a very attractive woman. Her appearance, figure, and straightforward personality were all to Reynolds's liking. There was no doubt about this. However, Reynolds didn't dare to accept this generous gift. Even if Townsend was willing, Mike Searle wouldn't be willing. As the master of the Dragon Clan, how could he let his daughter marry a dirty businessman who started his business by selling inferior drugs? He would only kill him to protect his daughter's innocence. Townsend's expression was cold. I'll give you two choices. The first is to marry me, and the second is to let my father castrate you. I can guarantee that Lin Ling and the others will be fine. Reynolds shuddered and said in a trembling voice, Miss Townsend, let's talk things over. Don't be impulsive. Townsend said with unusual dissatisfaction, Am I ugly? Reynolds hurriedly waved his hand. No, Miss Townsend is a natural beauty. You're the most attractive woman I've ever seen. Although Reynolds thought Lin Ling was more beautiful, he didn't care so much now that he had to flatter her. Townsend said, My figure is not good? Reynolds flattered again. Miss Townsend's figure is like a devil's, charming and irresistible. When I see it, I want to. Reynolds found that he had gone a bit too far and had a tendency to develop into lewdness. This was not the right situation, so he quickly stopped talking. Townsend said, You want to *CK me, right? Yes, no. Reynolds's tongue was like a lotus flower, and he didn't know how to answer properly. If he didn't know, he would definitely mistake Townsend for a shameless girl based on her words. Reynolds was no exception. He thought to himself, when did this evil woman become so open-minded? Just because he saw that mole, she really thought of herself as a member of the Chin family? Townsend continued to ask unyieldingly, My family is too poor to be worthy of you? Reynolds thought that if the dragon race was poor, there would be no rich people in the king's realm. He said with a sad face, Let's put it this way, Miss Townsend. It's because your family and yourself are too outstanding that I don't dare to have the thought of marrying you. Otherwise, your father would definitely kill me. Townsend snorted and said, I don't care. In short, you have to think of a way for me. Otherwise, let him kill you. At worst, I'll be a widow. Damn it, Reynolds cursed in his heart. It was said that after mating, female spiders would bite and eat the male spiders. This dragon girl was almost as vicious as the female spiders. Seeing Townsend's determined look, Lin Ling and the other girls were helpless. They could only stare at Reynolds and see how he would solve it. Wiping his sweat, Reynolds's mind turned quickly, and he quickly thought of a feasible solution. Then he said, Miss Townsend, how about this? I will secretly get engaged with you first. Then, when I have a successful career and stand out in Aquiline, it won't be too late to marry you. At that time, you won't lose face, and your father will be able to accept it. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Oh right, before this, Miss Townsend must not tell your father, otherwise you will really be a widow. The central strategy of his words was one word, delay. Chapter 507. Townsend thought for a while and said, Okay, I'll wait. But if you want to break the engagement, I'll hunt you down and kill you even if you have to run to the ends of the earth." Reynolds smiled. "How can that be? Miss Townsend is so beautiful. This is Dennis Fortune." Looking at her temper, Reynolds didn't mind. Now that she was his fiancée, she was like a wild horse with a rein. How long could he pull it? With a little bit of training, wouldn't she be more docile than a Persian cat? Getting this girl, who was extremely important to his future, was simply a gift from the heavens. It came too easily, almost like an illusion. Reynolds bit his tongue hard. The sharp pain reminded him that he was not in a dream. At first, he thought that an unintentional mistake would turn into an unexpected disaster. But in the end, it was a dramatic happy ending. Reynolds could not help but think of an old saying from Earth: "Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise." In Reynolds' dictionary, there was no such thing as lewd, only more lewd. Thus, even after Townsend became his fiancée, he still slept with Lin Ling and the other women. Generally speaking, in the king's realm, other than the wife, the concubines could not sleep with their husbands every night. They could only wait in the side room. But Reynolds did not care about this rule. He could do whatever he wanted. This was the rule. The dragon lady also let him do whatever he wanted. She did not object at all. Reynolds admired this very much. He thought that it would take some time to train this shrewish woman to be obedient. He did not expect things to be so simple. Reynolds asked Lin Ling to set up more scouting puppets in the inner court. He also personally set up some trap. In short, Michael Searle must not know about Townsend. The last time he was forced to investigate, it was because he said that he wanted to observe the effect of Townsend's breasts in the outer court. That was why there was a problem. Now, in the inner court of the Heavenly Network, Reynolds believed that even if Michael Searle came personally, he would not be able to enter the most secure central area without being discovered. The Dragon King had always been shrewd, but he had made a mistake this time. According to his usual behavior, Reynolds was just a timid little merchant who was careful to maintain his newly established business and would never dare to do anything to his daughter. But he was wrong, and very wrong. Renaud had always been a bold person. He dared to kill Leon in front of guys. How arrogant he was could be imagined. Mike Searle's miscalculation had led to his third daughter falling into the wolf's mouth. To be more precise, Townsend was the one who initiated the marriage, and Reynolds was the one who was forced into it. It was just that he accepted it willingly and joyfully. Because Townsend's devotion was based on a certain deep-rooted concept, without emotional support, marriage would not be stable. It was like a double-edged blade, and a slight carelessness could hurt oneself. In order to win her favor, Reynolds tried his best to make her happy, such as watching the stars and the moon, giving her flowers, accompanying her shopping, or personally cooking for her. It was really difficult for Reynolds. He was a rookie when it came to picking up girls. He used all the pitifully few methods to pick up girls. But the most useful method was to recite poems. He took a few ancient poems from Earth that praised love and recited them to her under the moonlight, and it had a miraculous effect. When Townsend saw the cinnabar mole, she had already accepted her fate. In her preconceived subconscious, she only wanted to make up for her regrets with the good qualities of her future husband. Then, she was pleasantly surprised to find that Reynolds was not just a profiteer who knew how to sell dirty things. He had many good qualities. For example, he was humorous, meticulous, considerate, and romantic. Most importantly, he was a very literary person, just like her father whom she worshipped. Thus, she slowly fell for him. Let me tell you, black-faced ghost, no matter how many women you find, I will make them big. Otherwise, I will teach you a lesson, humph. Townsend pinched Reynolds's nose to threaten him. As the Dragon King had hundreds of wives and concubines, Townsend, who was deeply affected, had long been numbed by the concept of men being romantic. The only thing she could fight for was a position among Reynolds's women. But then again, she was very surprised that Reynolds only had 1 or even 2 women. For his wealth today, even 10 women were not enough. Holding Townsend on his left and Lin Ling on his right, Reynolds felt like he was dreaming. With the Dragon Girl, many troublesome things were suddenly solved. Especially in politics, things that could not be solved by ordinary friends could be solved indirectly with her help. Reynolds was in a good mood. He stared at Townsend's chest and said, "Tsk, you want to make it big with such little capital?" Townsend became angry out of humiliation. She pinched him hard on the shoulder and said, "What are you saying? Are you mocking me?" Lin Ling watched the two of them flirt from the side and laugh. She didn't know why, but she didn't feel jealous at all. She knew very well how important Townsend was to Reynolds. Of course, in Reynolds's heart, Lin Ling's position would never be shaken. If Townsend was jealous and behaved atrociously towards Lin Ling, he would not hesitate to divorce her and offend the Dragon King. Helena and the other women were already asleep. The business had continued to increase, and they were too tired. Townsend said unhappily, don't laugh. Help me teach him a lesson. And Debbie, Molly, and Helena, come too." Townsend was not stupid. He had seen many fights in the dragon race. He knew how important Lin Ling was to Reynolds, and also Reynolds's temper. He did not dare to treat her badly. She was like a sister to him. If he could get a capable helper to fight for Reynolds's favor, it would be very useful for his plan to make it big in the future. Lin Ling giggled. Of course, she would not listen to Townsend to deal with Reynolds. As for Lorna and the other women, they did not dare to offend him. Reynolds smiled and said, "I'm sorry, but you are no longer Miss. You are my woman." Townsend was not convinced. "So what if I am your woman? Don't even think about it if you want to manipulate me like a puppet. Just give up." Townsend was indeed not like Lin Ling, who was obedient to Reynolds. She was a woman with a certain degree of independence. However, when it came to important matters, she would never dare to go against him. She would even do her best to help him. This was caused by the deep-rooted mentality of follow the husband's orders that she had cultivated since she was young. Reynolds looked at Townsend and felt that she was very interesting. A woman like her should be spoiled. At first he was just being used by her, but now Reynolds was slowly starting to like her. Reynolds patted the Dragon Girl's shoulder and said, Okay, Mississippi, whatever you say, ha." Townsend pursed his lips and said, "I brought you some good news to cheer you up." Chapter 508. Reynolds's mind shook. "What good news?" Townsend snorted. "I won't say it, you're making me angry." Reynolds could faintly guess what it was, but he had to confirm it with his own ears. "Good madam, don't keep me in suspense. Just say it." The word madam worked well on Townsend. It was also Reynolds's well-tested trump card. The Dragoness immediately softened. "Forget it. I'll tell you. I've already asked my father to help you with the sea hunt." As expected, Reynolds was overjoyed as he kissed her on the lips. "Haha, good, very good." Townsend's beautiful face blushed for the first time as she complained, "You're taking advantage of me again." Although she said this, her heart was filled with joy. Reynolds looked at her delicate and beautiful face and his lust was aroused. However, he did not dare to act rashly. If he saw Townsend's cinnabar mole, the Dragon King would definitely see it and it would be troublesome. Therefore, Reynolds could only act quickly. Townsend said, "Dennis, you have to work hard at the sea hunt. If you can get a good result, our marriage will be much smoother." Reynolds said, "Relax, I definitely won't disappoint you." That's right, I heard that the sea hunt is also a son-in-law selection event, right?" The sea hunt was a place to show off, and it would attract a large number of Aquilan girls to watch. A brave warrior would easily gain the favor of a beautiful woman, creating a happy ending. Over time, many large and small families or families with a bit of fame would bring their daughters to join the crowd, looking for a good son-in-law. This had already become an ancient tradition of Acolin. Townsend nodded. That's right. Reynolds grabbed his chin. I heard that the Ori family's Avina will also appear at the sea hunt. I don't know if that's true or not. I heard that Avina is an ice beauty that won't melt even after 10,000 years. I never thought that she would be there. Hey, hey! Seeing his lecherous look, Townsend said angrily, Do you want her to take a fancy to you? Reynolds saw Townsend become jealous and was a bit surprised. She had already said that she didn't care if he took a concubine, so why was she so agitated now? He asked in surprise, What's wrong with you? Do you have a grudge with this Avina? Townsend snorted and said, I don't care about anyone else, but not her. The Ori family was a large family second only to the Dragon clan in Acolin. As one of the most famous people of the younger generation, Avina was famous whether it was in terms of beauty or martial arts. She could compete with Townsend and was seen as the strongest competitor by the Dragon Girl. Adding in the fact that the two of them had different views since they were young, they didn't get along. Townsend thought that Avina was pretending to be virtuous and hypocritical, but Avina retorted that Townsend was too wild and unladylike. Women were narrow-minded, so they had a grudge against each other. Of course, they wouldn't fight or even duel like men. They just didn't like each other. Reynolds still didn't quite understand the grudge between the two. Anti-advertisement. Why? Townsend frowned and said, Don't ask so many questions. In short, I won't share a husband with that woman. Do you want her or me? You tell me. Reynolds thought to himself that women were really unreasonable when they got jealous. He had just casually mentioned the name Avina, and they hadn't even met, but Townsend was already so nervous that it was as if someone was trying to steal his husband away from him. He laughed and said, Of course I want my wife. What does Avina count for? She's just a pile of shit in my eyes. Townsend's heart filled with joy when he heard this. She took the initiative to give him a kiss, which was rare. It could be seen just how happy she was. Reynolds's interest was piqued. What kind of woman was Avina? She was just too low-key. She was as famous as Townsend, but she had never appeared on the news before. At least he had never seen her before. The day of the sea hunt was approaching, so he should know then. Although Townsend was very disgusted with her, Reynolds did not give up on seeing her face because Avina's nickname made him think of another woman, a woman who was also known as an ice beauty. During this period of time in Renault, he was very carefree and proud of his success. First of all, the business negotiations in the various countries of the continent went smoothly. Chain stores sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, quickly growing. Not long after, at least a third of the countries in the king's realm had the plaque Rejuvenation Hall. The huge profits were like a flood that couldn't be stopped. It rolled in and the growth was extremely fierce. In Acolin, he continued to develop a good relationship with other high-level people. Although he never appeared on the news, there weren't many people who didn't know the name, Dennis. There was also the upcoming sea hunt, which might push his popularity and status to a higher level. Chun Lin's luck could be said to have bounced back. From being chased like a stray dog, he was now a famous person in Acolin. Although he couldn't call the wind and summon the rain, no one dared to look down on him. After taking Yi into his pocket, Chun Lin's life was even smoother. He was almost never hindered in his work. He even began to wonder if Yi was his lucky star, a legendary woman who could bring good fortune to her husband and children. In addition to being busy with business, Chun Lin was also vigorously training talent. The first batch of people was his large group of servants because they were the most pitiful people, but also the ones with the most clean background. These women all had low self-esteem and were numb. It was very difficult for them to become capable people with self-awareness, but this didn't make Chun Lin shrink back. The pervert used the methods of training female spies on Earth, personally instilling a large amount of new ideas into them every day. First, they had to be absolutely loyal to their master, Then they had to be led through actual combat to develop their self-confidence. If they were competent, they could obtain money, status, respect, and more freedom than a servant. This was undoubtedly a very tempting opportunity. A lowly servant suddenly seeing the light of hope that could change her fate, there was no need to mention how attractive it was. With both ideas and material, this group of women were very focused on learning. They could be considered trusted people, but Chun Lin didn't know if they would succeed. Their innate conditions were too bad, so he was afraid that their thoughts would be imprisoned. They would be so obedient that they would rather be a slave than struggle. Because of this, they were still in the experimental stage. If they succeeded, Chun Lin would have them replace him and use the same method to train the next batch of people. Then the next batch would do the same thing. Of course, this process was very long, especially in the beginning. The help that a few people could bring was very limited. Everything was going according to plan, developing in the direction he imagined. The only regret was that Chun Lin's martial arts were progressing very slowly. Couldn't compare to the others, perhaps it was because of the limitations of the world. Although his cultivation technique was unmatched on the continent and he had a high starting point, which was already leaps and bounds compared to others, Chun Lin was still not satisfied. Then again, the sea hunt was already in the countdown. Chapter 509. In the blink of an eye, there were only 5 days left until the sea hunt. All of Akelin's households were decorated with decorations, and shops selling mascots on the streets suddenly increased. Every household was in a festive mood. Chun Lin's residence in the first-class city of Gatuchuozhong was even more lively. She was dressed up beautifully by the servants, as if she was a substitute bride. However, it wasn't just to send Chun Lin off to the sea hunting grounds tomorrow. More importantly, today was Lin Ling's birthday. After today, she would be 20 years old. Lin Ling, who was dressed up, was beautiful and cute. Other than her black hair, she was wearing a purple dress. Her figure was curvy, and she looked like a violet flower that had just bloomed. She shyly showed her extraordinary beauty to the world. Even the other girls were amazed by her beauty, not to mention Chun Lin. Chun Lin didn't spread the news of Lin Ling's birthday. He just celebrated it on his own. However, he had many female servants, and all of them were very lively and indulgent under the love of Chun Lin, a master who didn't have a strict sense of hierarchy. 2 women made a play, and 3 women made a street. Chun Lin had received at least 20 women as gift. Including Helena and Yi, it was like a market. It was lively enough. Everyone gave Lin Ling their blessings and gift. Among them, Yi's most valuable gift was a water avoidance bead. After wearing it, one's ability to move in the water would be doubled, and they could breathe through their pores. To the residents of the Sea Kingdom, it was easy to imagine how important it was. The water avoidance bead was formed after the death of a 1,000-year-old water-type monster, the ice avoidance bead. There weren't many magic beasts that died naturally, and there were even fewer that could be formed, showing how precious it was. Yi was a member of the dragon race, and was naturally good at swimming. She could also breathe in the water, so the water avoidance bead wasn't very useful to her. However, to give away such a precious treasure was already very generous. This was because she knew that by building a good relationship with Lin Ling, she was indirectly grabbing onto Chun Lin's heart. The Dragon Girl's plan was very well thought out. Of course, the crafty old fox Chun Lin wouldn't not understand her crafty thoughts, but as the saying goes, if the family is harmonious, everything will prosper. Since Yi was so smart, he didn't need to be taught to understand this truth, which was even better. All the servants and attendants of the Chun Lin estate were gathered together in the elegant garden in the inner courtyard. In the center of the garden was a large round stone table with 6 layers of cake placed on it. The rich and mellow smell of butter mixed with the fragrance of flowers in the garden, making it even more attractive. Green leaves of agate fruits decorated the cake even more exquisitely. 11 small candles of different colors were emitting a beautiful light. This cake was completely made according to the method on Earth, and it was the first one in the king's realm. The number of candles represented Lin Ling's age. This ceremony was very special and novel for everyone. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Yi hadn't seen it before. She pinched Chun Lin's arm and said, "When it's my birthday, you must also make a cake like this for me." The more she came into contact with him, the more she found that Chun Lin had a lot of new tricks up his sleeve. For a dragon girl who likes strange things and can spend a lot of money for useless things, the temptation is naturally very strong. Unknowingly, Yi has been deeply attracted to Chun Lin from the time when she was willing to follow him. Chun Lin was pinched by her and felt pain. He nodded again and again. "Okay, as long as young miss says." Yi was satisfied and let go of his hand. Chun Lin looked at the place where he was pinched just now and saw a red patch. Those shortcomings of the dragon girl, many times in Chun Lin's eyes, were very cute. Unfortunately, she liked to pinch people for no reason, and she didn't hold back. Looking at the party Chun Lin had carefully prepared for her, Lin Ling's excited little face turned red under the candlelight. Chun Lin smiled and said, "Come, close your eyes and make a wish. If you can blow out all the candles in one breath, your wish will come true." Lin Ling happily said, "Dennis, really?" Although she still called Chun Lin like this, Yi already knew that they weren't blood-related siblings. Chun Lin nodded, "Really?" Profiteering was like a flood that couldn't be stopped. It rolled in, and the momentum of growth was extremely fierce. In Acolin, he continued to develop a good relationship with other high-level people. Although he never appeared on TV, there weren't many people who didn't know the name, Dennis. There was also the upcoming Sea Hunt, which might push his popularity and status to a higher level. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Chun Lin's luck had bounced back strongly. From being chased like a stray dog to becoming a famous person in Acolin, although they didn't dare say that he could summon the wind and rain, no one dared to look down on him. After taking Yi into his pocket, Chun Lin's life was even smoother. He was almost never stopped doing things. He even began to wonder if Yi was his lucky star, the legendary top-quality woman who could bring good fortune to her husband and children. Other than being busy with business, Chun Lin also vigorously cultivated talents, and the first batch of people was his large group of servants. Because they were the most pitiful people, they also had the most clean background. These women were all very inferior and numb. It was very difficult for them to become decisive and capable people with self-awareness, but this didn't make Chun Lin shrink back. The pervert used the methods of training female spies on Earth, personally instilling a large amount of new ideas into them every day. First, they had to be absolutely loyal to their master, then they had to be led through actual combat to develop self-confidence. If they were competent, they could obtain money, status, respect, and more freedom than the servants. This was without a doubt a very tempting opportunity. For a lowly servant to suddenly see a ray of hope that could change her fate, there was no need to mention how attractive it was. With both thoughts and material, this group of women was also very focused on learning. They could be considered as trusted subordinates, but Chun Lin didn't know if they would succeed. Their innate conditions were a bit too bad. What he was most afraid of was that their thoughts had already been imprisoned. They were so obedient that they would rather become slaves than struggle. Because of this, they were still in the experimental stage. If they succeeded, Chun Lin would have them replace him and use the same method to train the next batch of people, and then the next batch would do the same thing. Of course, this process was very long, especially in the beginning. The help that these few people could bring was very limited. Everything was going according to plan, developing in the direction he imagined. The only regret was that Chun Lin's own martial skills were progressing very slowly. It couldn't compare to others, perhaps it was because he was limited by worldly affairs. Although his cultivation technique was unparalleled on the continent and he had a high starting point, already advancing by leaps and bounds compared to others, Chun Lin was still not satisfied. Not to mention, the sea hunt was already in the countdown. In the blink of an eye, there were only 5 days left until the sea hunt. All of Akelin's households were decorated with decorations, and there were many stores selling mascots on the street. Every household was in a festive mood. Chapter 510. Reynolds' mansion in the first-tier city of Katyuta was even livelier. The servants dressed her up to the nines, making her look like a surrogate bride. However, it wasn't just for the sake of sending Reynolds off to the sea hunt tomorrow. More importantly, it was Elaine's birthday. After today, she would be 20 years old. Elaine was beautiful and adorable under her splendid attire. Aside from her black hair, she wore a purple muslin dress that accentuated her curve. She looked like a violet that had just bloomed, bashfully showing off her extraordinary beauty to the world. Even the other girls were amazed by her beauty, let alone Reynolds. Reynolds didn't spread the news of Irene's birthday, and just celebrated it on his own. However, he had many female servants, and all of them were very lively and indulgent under the doting of Reynolds, who didn't have a strict concept of hierarchy. 2 women were a play and 3 women were a street. Reynolds had received at least 20 women, and including Helena and Avina, it was like a lively market. It was lively enough. Everyone gave Elaine their blessings and gift. Among them, Avina's most valuable gift was a water-repellent pearl. After wearing it, one's ability to move in water would be doubled. One could also breathe through one's pores. One could imagine how important it was to the people of the Sea Kingdom. The water-repellent pearl was formed after the death of a 1,000-year-old water beast, the ice-repellent pearl. There were very few demons that died of natural causes, and even fewer that could be turned into pearls. Avina was a member of the dragon race. She was naturally good at swimming and could breathe underwater. The water-repellent pearl wasn't very useful to her, but it was generous of her to give away such a valuable treasure. She knew that by building a good relationship with Elaine, she would indirectly win Reynolds' heart. The dragon girl's wishful thinking was very good. Of course, the sly Reynolds wouldn't fail to understand what she was thinking. But as the saying goes, if the family is harmonious, everything will prosper. Since Avina was so smart, she didn't need to be taught to understand this principle, which was even better. In the elegant garden of the inner courtyard, all the servants and attendants of Renault's mansion were gathered together. In the center of the garden, there was a large 6-layer cake on a round stone table. The rich aroma of butter mixed with the fragrance of the flowers in the garden made the cake even more attractive. Green agate fruits decorated the cake, and 11 small candles of different colors were emitting a beautiful light. The cake was made completely according to Earth's method. It was the first of its kind in the world of kings. The number of candles represented Elaine's age. This ceremony was very unique to everyone. Even the knowledgeable Avina had never seen something like this before. She pinched Reynolds' arm and said, "When it's my birthday, you have to make me a cake like this too." The more she interacted with Reynolds, the more she realized that he had a lot of new tricks up his sleeve. For a dragon girl who liked strange things and was willing to spend a lot of money on useless things, the temptation was very strong. Unknowingly, Avina had gone from being willing to follow fate to being deeply attracted to Reynolds. Reynolds was in pain from her pinch, but he nodded and said, "Okay, I'll do as you say." Avina was satisfied and let go of him. Reynolds looked at the place where she pinched him and saw a red patch. The dragon girl's shortcomings were often cute in Reynolds' eyes, but it was a pity that she liked to pinch people for no reason, and she didn't hold back either. Looking at the party Reynolds had prepared for her, Elaine's excited face flushed red under the candlelight. Reynolds smiled and said, "Come, Linger. Close your eyes and make a wish. If you can blow out all the candles in one breath, your wish will come true." Elaine said happily, "Dennis, really?" Although she still called Reynolds that way, Avina already knew that they were not blood-related siblings. Reynolds nodded and said, "Really?" Elaine closed her eyes and clasped her hands together with a smile. After more than 10 seconds, she opened her eyes again. Then, she puffed out her cheeks and blew out all the candles on the cake. Everyone cheered loudly. Although there weren't many people, the atmosphere was lively. Reynold hugged her slender waist and said, "What did you wish for, Ling-er?" Elaine glanced at Reynold and said, "Humph, I'm not telling you." Avina interrupted, "Dennis, you miser, I don't think you've given Elaine a gift yet, right?" Elaine was satisfied and helped Reynold out of the situation. "Dennis prepared this special cake for me. Isn't that the best gift?" Reynold nodded seriously and said, "Don't worry, I've already prepared it." He took out a small crescent necklace from his pocket. The material was strange, orange, and translucent. Its smooth surface gave off an ancient feeling, but it was neither bright nor shiny. Avina snorted and said, "What kind of gift is this? It's so shabby." Reynold smiled and said, "This thing isn't very useful, but I've been wearing it since I was born. It's called amber, also known as the beast soul. It was produced in ancient times and symbolizes purity and eternity. It's said that it can ward off evil and protect one's body. I'm not bragging, but you won't be able to find a second one in the entire continent." On Earth, amber was a fossil from a prehistoric pine tree. It had been formed for 40 to 60,000 years. It was a question whether the king's realm had such a long history. This was the only thing Reynolds' mother had left him. However, on this day, he gave Elaine his love, which showed how much he loved her. Avina had also seen the amber necklace around Reynolds' neck. She thought it was an ordinary ornament, but now she knew that it was something he had been wearing since he was born. It was very likely to be a family heirloom. Just this meaning alone was no small matter. It was more precious than any valuable or useful treasure, not to mention that there wouldn't be a second one in the entire continent. Avina, who had originally despised it, suddenly felt a little jealous. Elaine naturally knew the meaning of this unremarkable necklace. She was so excited that she didn't know what to say. Reynold unbuckled the necklace and put it on the girl's swan-like white jade neck. "Happy birthday, Elaine!" He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when the amber came into contact with Elaine's body, it suddenly flashed like a light bulb. However, it was almost undetectable. Just when Reynold thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, Elaine's kiss fell on his lip. The touched girl had let go of her reservations and boldly expressed her love in front of other girls. Adulthood meant a lot of things. It seemed that he could do more things that he couldn't do before. Reynold was drunk. This time, he was really drunk. He had drunk at least 2 jars of the 100 Men Fall that Avina had stolen from the Dragon King's treasury. Even an Iron Man would fall down. He was so happy that he couldn't control himself. He had witnessed Elaine grow from a weak little girl with no fighting ability to survive to the powerful and confident spirit envoys she was today. He was very gratified. At the same time, he was also glad that he didn't use the fleeting time given by Randolph in the wrong place. Chapter 5:11. The bright red morning sun slowly rose from the sea, sprinkling the first rays of the morning on the water. The entire ocean sparkled with golden waves, beautiful and full of vitality. Diligent seagulls were soaring in the sky, struggling to find the food they needed for the new day. They were so elegant in the sea breeze. Small swordfish with colorful wings leaped out of the water for more than 10 meters before diving straight back into the sea. A group of young sea lions were chasing and playing on the waves. Countless amphibious bantams were swaying their fat butts as they climbed ashore to breathe the freshest air or lay flat on the beach, exposing their big round bellies to bask in the sun. They were so relaxed and contented. This was the Kuan Sha Island of the Dara Inland Sea. It was also a small level 4 city in the Akalan Kingdom. Everything was full of vitality, and everything was full of vitality. However, a loud and distant sound of war drums broke the peaceful scene in front of them. all kinds of small animals were frightened and nervous. Even the bold sea lions quickly dived back into the safe embrace of the sea. The bantams were even more panicked as they clumsily ran towards the ocean. Only the seagulls were still flying freely without fear, but they all opened their eyes wide, waiting for the arrival of the uninvited guests. The sound of war drums came closer and closer, followed by a high and continuous sound of horns. Not long after, hundreds of small islands came into sight. To be more precise, it was a huge creature that looked like a floating island, a sea worm. As the largest means of transportation in the king's realm, it was shocking to see hundreds of them. At the front of each sea glutton, several hundred half-naked crabmen were furiously beating the large drums made from the skin of the billowing rhinoceros, while sweating profusely. Below the stage were 2 rows of smaller platforms, each occupied by squid men. Holding the half-meter-long horn in his hand, he puffed up his cheeks and blew it with all his might. Such a grand sea show could only be the Aquilan sea hunt. No one could think of anything else that could be said to be pleasing. The vast ocean seemed to be conquered. What a magnificent scene it was! The warriors on the sea worm all felt their blood boil. Renaud's heart was stirred. He saw a heroic spirit, a brave and heroic spirit. No wonder the Aquilan people were so passionate about the sea hunt. It was indeed a hot-blooded activity, as exciting as the Olympic Games. Erin's face was also flushed red as she snuggled up to Reynolds. She had just experienced the happiest moment 3 days ago. After completing the transformation from a young girl to a woman, the girl was even more beautiful and moving after the rain and dew. In addition to her skin being whiter and more tender, there was also a layer of faint white fluorescence on the surface of her body. Apart from Irene, Lysalona and Helena were also part of the hunting team. As Reynolds' family, they naturally had to come and cheer for him. Avina was summoned back home by the Dragon King. Although she was reluctant, she had to put her family first during such an important festival. Each of the hundreds of sea glutes could carry around 2,000 to 3,000 people. Altogether, it would be 200,000 to 300,000 people. This was a large number of troops. Other than the Aquilan kingdom, there were more than 10 other sea countries like Neverending Gadi, Phykenra, Lagana, Icles, Israel, and other empires that had joined the hunt. In addition, it attracted a large number of people from all over the continent who came to watch the battle out of interest. Of course, the hunting ground wasn't a peaceful level 4 island like Kuan Sha or even Aquilan. Instead, it was an island on the border between the Dala Inland Sea and the South Asian Philippine Ocean, Atlantis. Atlantis was even larger than Spartax, a level 1 city in Aquilan, but no one lived there because it was called Ghost Island. Apart from the ferocious sea beasts that often came ashore to look for food, the worst thing was that the weather was extremely bad. Frost, rain, snow, and strong winds could descend at any time. The power of nature was awe-inspiring and unstoppable, even more ruthless than the magical beast. The area around Atlantis had also become a deserted area. The Dead Sea area, the bone-devouring area, the life-killing area, the soul-summoning area, and the resurrection area were all formed by the 6 areas. The spirit of the sea hunt was to challenge the eternal enemies of mankind. The magical beasts challenged themselves, and even the heavens. The mighty army carried countless confident and well-prepared warriors towards the forbidden area. Reynolds, who was enjoying the refreshing sea breeze at the edge of the sea glute's tail, felt that his confidence had reached an unprecedented peak. Generally speaking, confidence was proportional to one's strength. The large increase in spiritual power had long given Reynolds unprecedented confidence. A wind-splitting prawn, who seemed to want to test Reynolds' strength, just happened to jump out from the sea 7 meters away. It waved its pincers, and 2 wind arrows shot towards Reynolds. Reynolds didn't put such a low-level sea demon in his eyes before, let alone now. He slightly opened his right palm and pushed forward. There was no flame, no ice, and no sign of any attribute spiritual power. However, the fierce wind arrows suddenly stopped in the air, and the wind-splitting prawn followed suit. It was as if it was imprisoned by something invisible. There was nothing supporting it, but it was fixed in the air as if it had escaped from gravity. Reynolds's palm suddenly closed, and the small square space where the wind arrows and the wind-splitting prawn were at suddenly twisted strangely. With a ding sound like glass being hit by a hard rock, a crack appeared in the space, and then the crack quickly spread to other twisted places. The sea demon's body was torn apart along with the space that was torn apart, and it immediately died. When it fell back into the sea, it had turned into white demonic energy and was absorbed by Reynolds. If other people were present, they would definitely be inexplicably surprised. They had only heard of space magic, but had never heard of space spiritual power. Generally, space magic only had auxiliary functions such as teleporting and carrying items. It was simply unheard of to use it to attack directly. However, there was no one else in this area. Only Irene, Lanarissa, and the others were arranging the camp and setting up the tent. With the sea demon's speed, it would take about 3 days to reach Atlantis, which was not a short journey. On the night of Irene's birthday, the two of them lost control of their spiritual power, and finally, both of them fainted under the impact. However, when Reynolds woke up, he found that his spiritual power had soared to a new level, and a new kind of spiritual power had been produced. The same thing happened to Irene, but it was slightly different. Reynolds had also been intimate with many women, but it was the first time that something strange had happened. In the end, he thought of the 2 strange pills. After he and Irene took them, their bodies had some mysterious changes. That night, it was very likely that the 2 forces of the same origin had mutated through the 2 of them. Just as Reynolds expected, the demonic energy pill had the self-awareness of demonic energy and the docility of spiritual power. Usually, it was no different from spiritual power under the control of one's mind. However, under special circumstances, it would be activated, just like that night when it was attracted by Irene's forces of the same origin, it would be activated. The other activation situation was that when its life was threatened, it would automatically resist external forces. This was the source of Reynolds's active protective spiritual power. Chapter 5:12. For the time being, Reynolds was still unable to understand all of the effects of this spatial spiritual power. The spatial shattering just now was only the most proficient skill that he had mastered in a short period of time. He felt that his understanding of this spiritual power was still at a very superficial stage. It was like a partially open treasure house with many benefits waiting to be excavated. With power in his hands and a beauty in his arms, Reynolds's mood at the moment could only be described with one word: high-spirited. "Let's go back, Linger." Irene nodded meekly and leaned in his arms as they slowly walked back to the camp to savor the moment when the 2 of them were together. Before returning to the camp near the head of the Sea Glutton, Reynolds heard the exclamations of the crowd. At least 1,000 people were leaning against the railing to watch. Reynolds curiously followed their gazes and saw a green figure in the distance walking on the waves, like a goddess flying towards the Sea Glutton. When the green figure came closer, the crowd was surprised to find that it was the 3rd princess of the dragon race, Avina. They had long heard that the dragon race's water movement technique, waterless, was unparalleled in the world. It really lived up to its reputation. There were many strong people who could float on water, but it was rare to see someone as relaxed and elegant as her. It was as if she was taking a leisurely stroll, effortlessly. The sea lion came from a long distance, and there were very few people who could rely on the lightness technique in one breath to reach this level. Seeing the dragoness like a fairy flying over with the wind and making a big show of herself, Black Oil and the crowd exclaimed in admiration. Reynolds was proud, and a sense of accomplishment arose spontaneously. This kind of woman was actually in his hands. If he wanted her to go east, she wouldn't dare to go west. If he wanted her to go north, she wouldn't dare to go east. If he wanted her to go east, she wouldn't dare to go west. If he wanted her to go north, she wouldn't dare to go north. And he only relied on a packet of itching powder to do it. When Avina was only 30 meters away from the sea glutton, the water in front of her suddenly broke open, and a purple man-eating sea glutton suddenly drilled out. Its 4 limbs were wide open, and like a piece of cloth, it pounced towards Avina. A faint cold light could be seen flashing faintly. This was the man-eating sea glutton's unique hunting method. As long as one was caught by it, one would be pierced full of holes by the countless sharp teeth inside, and then be torn into pieces. It was very cruel. Everyone exclaimed. Man-eating centipedes could only be regarded as ferocious sea beasts at best. They were still far from the level of vicious beasts. However, the purple centipede had a lifespan of at least 150 years and could not be underestimated. Avina came here after a long journey, and her spiritual power was exhausted. Even Aaron covered her mouth. On the other hand, Reynolds's expression was calm, as if he didn't see his fiancée in danger. Almost at the same time, more than a dozen figures flew out from the sea. All of them were men, and most of them were between 12 and 16 years old. Warrior, archer, assassin. Judging from their armor and weapons, as well as their courage to rush 50 meters away to save someone, they must be the young heroes of Acolin. Reynolds's sea glutton was exceptionally huge and was one of the best of its kind. A large number of experts gathered on it. Those with average strength or fame, and those who weren't family members of experts, couldn't occupy a spot, let alone ordinary people. After the dozen people in front reacted the fastest, there were quite a few young men that flew out. They all shouted with a sound wave expansion technique, "Miss Avina, please don't panic, I'll be there immediately." They all wanted to show off in front of the crowd, and if they were lucky, they might even be able to win the heart of the beauty. They rushed forward one after another, like an arrow leaving a bow. It didn't seem like they were trying to save someone, but rather like beasts trying to steal their mate. Although Avina's fiery temper was well known, she was also famous for her beauty. She was also the Dragon King's favorite daughter, so if he could become the Dragon King's son-in-law, his future would be limitless. Moreover, the feeling of conquering the young miss of a rich family was also very good. The fastest was an elf clan male thief. This position was known for its speed, so this person was very famous. One of the Acolin 10 heroes, the Wind Shadow Thief Alec. His family's secret wind shadow technique was only a bit weaker than the Dragon Clan's traceless wave treading, so he was very popular among the newcomers. The elves were handsome and Alex purposely showed off his elegant figure. His beautiful golden hair fluttered in the wind, looking very cool. Everyone on the sea boat cheered for him, as well as the screams of quite a few young girls. The beasts behind him all secretly felt that it was a pity, letting this brat take the lead. Alex was very proud in his heart. He took out a polished dagger and stabbed it at the man eating chi. He said in a very elegant voice, "Miss Avina, don't worry." Avina had just dodged the man eating chi's first wave of attack. With a snort, her hand trembled and a long bone whip appeared in her hand, which she suddenly threw out. "Mind your own business." Alex, who was fantasizing about whether the beauty would repay him with her body, was shocked to find that Avina's bone whip was swinging towards him. The man-eating fiends in front of him also turned around and attacked him together. As a result, the pitiful thief was caught off guard and could only hastily dodge the combined attack of the man and beast. Part of the forceful spiritual energy left its trajectory and was greatly disrupted. He could no longer maintain his elegant figure and fell into the water with a splash. The other beasts behind him were scared by Avina's disregard for friend and foe, so they quickly slowed down. They looked at each other in blank dismay, considering whether or not they should help. They didn't need to hesitate any longer. Avina's purple light turned green and the spiritual energy that couldn't be used suddenly increased. The dragon girl stood on the water's surface as light as a feather, without a trace of panic. Her hand whipped down and the man-eating armadillo gave a pitiful cry as it was split in half, turning into demonic energy. At this moment, Alex adjusted his spiritual power and leaped out of the water. As a native of the sea country, his life was not in danger in the water. However, he had lost a lot of face. He had originally gone out to save people, but under the gaze of thousands of people, he had crawled back like a drowned rat. He was simply ashamed. The other beasts who had the same idea of picking up girls as him had personally experienced Avina's strange temperament and were secretly glad that they were not the first to bear the brunt. Avina ignored everyone's gaze and approached the sea glutton with a few jumps. At this time, another dog-toothed shark jumped out recklessly, wanting to challenge the dragon girl's power. Avina didn't care and raised her bone whip again. Even if there were 100 of such monsters, they still wouldn't be her opponent. Just at this moment, 2 beautiful blue flame flowers flew out, turned from both sides, and landed right in the eyes of the dog-toothed shark. However, there was a "chee" sound. Amidst the sound of ice and fire colliding, the dog-toothed shark fiercely flapped its tail in pain, creating a large splash, and then sank into the water. The eyes were a vital part, so this dog-toothed shark would never be able to recover. In the future, it could only wander in the sea like a headless fly until it died. The helper's method was very clever, but people thought that he was very stupid. It was obvious that Avina didn't like to be helped by others. There was a precedent just now, and in the next moment there was another person who wanted to hurt her. It seemed that this guy was tired of living. Ai Wena's brows were tightly furrowed, and her pretty face was covered in frost. Her bone whip trembled until it was perfectly straight, but when she followed the trail of the flame flower to find the person who had come to her aid, her jade-like face immediately thawed and turned into a warm smile. She lightly jumped to his side. "Dennis?" She saw that everyone was watching. Then she added 2 words, "Mr. Dennis." The helper was her future husband, and he had the responsibility to protect his wife. Naturally, Avina was not angry but happy. Chapter 5:13. As soon as Reynolds brought Mithrin to the small garden, he saw her flipping open her notebook and firing questions like a machine gun. After the modification of this divine art, the effect is a little different from what I expected. What should I do? The use of the power of faith here is theoretically possible, but why can't I do it well? I also feel that it's very difficult here. I wrote you a letter, why didn't you reply to me? When facing other people, Mithrin felt that speaking a word was tiring, but in front of Reynolds she didn't feel this way at all. She even felt that she could talk for half a day. Perhaps this was because Pastor Reynolds had a reassuring aura. The girl thought so. Reynolds carefully flipped through the contents of the notebook, which was a record of Mithrin's research on the modification of the divine art after she returned. Mithrin sat beside him, her hands on her legs, her palms holding her head like a flower. She silently stared at Reynolds's face, patiently waiting for him to flip through the pages. But after reading only 2 or 3 pages, Reynolds found several problems. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and complained, "Wow? You can't even do this, dummy? You're so stupid. This is just a 2nd-level divine art. Why can't you just cast it after more than a week?" Ugh, Mithrin lowered her head, feeling wronged, and reluctantly defended herself. But this is a modified divine art. After the modification of the divine art, the level and difficulty could no longer be based on the original standard, but it wasn't like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. The specific level needed to be specifically evaluated to know. And this disease cure divine art was a 2nd-level divine art before the modification. According to the standard of a normal person, the original version would take half a month or even a month to master, and the process would also require a lot of practice and guidance, not to mention the modified version. It only took Mithrin a week to be able to cast the spell. This speed was worthy of her title as a genius of magic. Unfortunately, this was still some distance away from Reynolds's standard. "Dummy, have you been slacking off this week? You didn't spend all your time on this, did you?" Renaud asked again. Mithrin blinked her big eyes, somewhat unsure of how to answer. She felt that she was working hard, right? He spent a lot of time studying the divine arts every day. However, it was true that she didn't spend all her time on this. After all, she was still a bishop. Even though Bishop Yek had arranged for people to help her with the mundane affairs, there were still many things that she had to deal with personally. Reynolds saw that she didn't speak. After thinking for a while, he felt that he had probably guessed the reason. He reached out and touched her head. "Sigh. Actually, I understand you. After all, you're a girl. There are always a few days every month when it's inconvenient for you. I can't be too strict. However, you have to remember that people like us who don't have good talent must not feel sorry for ourselves. Instead, we have to work even harder to catch up to those geniuses. If it was my senior brother, forget it. Let's not talk about these useless things. Let's continue." Mithrin nodded vigorously and rubbed her head against Reynolds's palm. Reynolds then began to answer her various questions, and very patiently helped her reorganize her thoughts. Mithrin, on the other hand, was making notes in her notebook by the light of the magic lamp in the little garden. Bishop Yek had already gone back. He seemed to be very assured of the two young people and was not afraid that they would do anything out of line. Of course, it might be better if they did. Unfortunately, when Mithrin returned very late, the two of them were still engaged in a very simple academic discussion. After sending Mithrin away, Reynolds and the old bishop had the opportunity to open the money pouch that Bishop Yek had given them. Good heavens, a total of 50 gold coins. Who would have thought that the record for the highest amount of offerings set in the morning would be broken so quickly? These people really don't treat money as money. Reynolds couldn't help but sigh. "Don't forget, this is just the money for a random ceremony," the old bishop reminded him. Reynolds then asked, "So now we're considered rich, right?" The old bishop nodded. "That's good. I'll go to the market tomorrow and buy beef, mutton, and fish. Buy. Vegetables, plates, and milk for the kittens. I'll buy until I'm full," Reynolds said excitedly. Just like that, Reynolds experienced the life of a rich person the next day. He chewed so much beef that his teeth hurt. Although there were still no believers in the church today, and the church was still very quiet, he felt very fulfilled. Is this the life of a rich person? It's so simple and unpretentious. But that night, an unfamiliar guest came to the door. It was a fat, middle-aged man with a hairline that was on the verge of collapse. He wasn't a believer here, nor was he a neighbor nearby. He was just wandering around in boredom. When he passed by the church, he wanted to come in and vent his frustrations. This kind of thing was very common in the sinless city. The prosperity here brought convenience and enjoyment to the people, but it also brought heavy pressure. People habitually went to the church to seek comfort and psychological counseling. The normal clergy wouldn't reject them. Even if they weren't believers, they would still listen and comfort them. If they were comforted well, they might take the opportunity to join the church. Therefore, Reynolds didn't reject him and led him to the confession room that had been converted from a confession room. The middle-aged man sat in the narrow confession room and felt a little strange. The confession room here was very small, much smaller than the other churches. It felt more like a detention room. It was fine to go in, but it would be very troublesome to come out later. Maybe it was because the church was very small to begin with? He didn't think too much about it. However, he soon heard the clanking of chains and the sound of locks being locked. The door that he had entered through had been firmly locked by Reynolds. "Why did you lock the door?" he hurriedly asked. "Oh, this is a ritual of our church. It symbolizes locking in your troubles and suffering. When you come out, they will leave you." Reynolds answered outside the door and turned to the other side of the confession room. He opened the window in the middle. The confessionals and confessionals of other churches were separated from the clergy by beautiful glass or hollow patterns. But here they were separated by metal rods as thick as fingers. It looked like a prison or a cage. This was Reynolds's modification request, and it was very puzzling as to why it was designed like this. "Okay, what's troubling you? Tell me." Chapter 5:14. As Reynolds spoke, he handed him a cup of tea through the cell window. The middle-aged man took a sip of tea and did not speak. It was as if he was still thinking and organizing his words, but it was also as if he found it difficult to speak. This was also human nature. Not everyone could pour out their heart to a stranger. At times like this, a qualified priest needed to conduct some simple guidance to open the person's heart and let them pour out their heart to him. Although Reynolds had never done such a thing before, he had still learned the theoretical knowledge from the Lord. Thus, he took the initiative to speak and tried to guide the other party. Name? Occupation? Address? The middle-aged man was stunned, but he still answered truthfully, "My name is George. I'm 45 years old. I'm a small foreman. I live on 4th Avenue behind 3 streets. Seeing that the other party had finally spoken, Reynolds continued to guide. "What's your motive and purpose for coming here?" Actually, I have a friend. He hasn't been doing well recently." The middle-aged man was halfway through his sentence when Reynolds suddenly interrupted. "Tell me honestly, is this friend of yours?" This is me." "That's right. Confess and you'll be lenient. Tell me what's troubling you." Only then did the middle-aged man explain his situation in detail. It was roughly the common midlife crisis. His job was not going well, the competition was too strong, the pressure was too great, the relationship was not harmonious, insomnia, frequent urination, hairline, and so on. Reynolds listened silently, interrupting from time to ask about the details. "What's going on here? Explain it clearly. Why are you engaged in vicious competition with your peers? Do you know that this is against the law? Why didn't you report something like this in time?" As the middle-aged man spoke, he felt that something was wrong. Why did this seem like an interrogation? And there was an iron window in the middle. It really did feel like that. However, in the end, he still gave a rough explanation of the situation. Reynolds stood up, organized his words, and said, "I understand your situation. I understand your situation. Don't be afraid. I won't help you repent. There's a way to solve your troubles," Reynolds said as he helped him unlock the chains and iron lock on the confessional door, and let him out. The middle-aged man could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Renaud, in turn, assumed a serious air and said in an impassioned tone, "Don't be afraid when you encounter difficulties. Face them with a smile. The best way to overcome worries is to face them. Perseverance is victory. Do your best." He wanted to motivate and encourage the other party. The middle-aged man was stunned when he heard this. He paused for a moment before replying, "Mr. Pastor, I understand your reasoning, but, you mean I should go to the bar for a drink? Or find a woman to vent? Of course not. Why would you think that? Forget it. Come with me," Reynolds said as he led him all the way to the entrance of the church. At this time, it was already night outside, and the moonlight was bright, rendering the surrounding streets silvery white. "If you want to forget your troubles and relieve your stress, the easiest way is to run," Reynolds said. "Running?" The middle-aged man couldn't help but widen his eyes, but wasn't it already night time? Reynolds did not answer. Instead, he cast 2 divine spells on the middle-aged man. It was a level 3 protection divine spell, endurance and frenzy. When combined, it was equivalent to a weakened version of Valor's inspiration. It was the same as the level 5 divine spell that Reynolds had cast on the jewelry in Sir Donald's manor. The group version of this divine spell was the Valor's Prayer that Reynolds had wanted to cast yesterday, but was stopped. However, when casting the divine spell, Reynolds felt a little bit off. It seemed that the process was not as smooth as before, and there was a slight obstruction. He did not think much about it. Maybe it was because he had not used this kind of low-level divine spell for a long time and was rusty. The middle-aged man who was blessed by the magic spell suddenly felt a surge of hot blood in his body. His whole body felt like it was on fire. He even felt that he had become several years younger. He couldn't help but shout loudly, "Don't worry, I'm going to kill you. Ah, my youth is back. Go. Release your hot blood and youth, sprinkle your sweat and passion, and run towards the moon," Renaud added, giving him another push on his back. The middle-aged man immediately spread his legs and began to run wildly along the street. Although he was extremely excited, he did not lose his rationality and could still control his actions. He could even feel the changes in his heart, so he would not lead to the tragedy of the bishop. This was also because Reynolds did not cast any divine spells that affected people's emotions and thoughts. As he ran, the middle-aged man did not feel tired. Instead, he felt more and more relaxed. The heavy burden in his heart seemed to have been expelled from his body along with his sweat. His whole body felt comfortable and relaxed. Just like that, he ran for 2 hours straight. By the time he returned to the entrance of the church, the duration of the divine spell had also ended. Immediately, he felt fatigue and soreness wash over him like a tide. He had no strength left in his body, and he could not even stand properly. He could only sit down at the entrance of the church, leaning against the wall as he panted. But even so, he still found a touch of relaxation and refreshment that he had not felt for a long time. He actually forgot the pain and frustration that had accumulated in his heart. After hearing the noise outside, Reynolds came out with a kitten on his head. He was training these kittens just now. "Mr. George, are you okay?" Reynolds asked. "Very tired, but very refreshed and relaxed." "I feel great." George's face showed a very natural and relaxed smile. "Do you need any help?" "No, just let me sit for a while. To tell you the truth, when I was young, I was the best runner in the village. I ran faster than a dog. Many girls liked me because of that." "Ha ha ha ha," George said very happily. Compared to the gloomy look he had when he first came in, it was as if he had become a different person. Reynolds kindly poured a cup of tea for him. He gulped it down and felt that his body had recovered some strength. He could now move on his own. "Thank you so much, Mr. Pastor. If it's possible, can I come again tomorrow?" "Of course." "Ah, right, I almost forgot." As George spoke, he hurriedly searched his body for some money, but to no avail. "Sorry, I seem to have forgotten to bring money today. Can I bring it to you tomorrow?" "Of course," Reynolds replied with a kind smile on his face. Chapter 5:15. When Reynolds smiled, his smile was always gentle and gentle. It was the most standard kind of smile, and no one could find fault with it. However, George felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart when he saw that smile. Even his back felt slightly cold. "Maybe I'm too tired that I'm hallucinating. This young priest is such a good person. Anyway, I'll come over tomorrow morning to donate the money before I go to the construction site. I can't lie to a good person like him." George did not think too much about it. He said goodbye to Reynolds and limped back to his house. That night, he slept soundly. It had been a long time since he woke up, and he was not disturbed by nightmares at all. So he quickly packed up and rushed to Mia's church with the money. Truth be told, he did not have to go to the church at all. After all, services like confessions were free in name and donations were all voluntary. Besides, he was not a follower of Mia's cult. Even if he did not go, no one would say anything about it. However, he instinctively felt that if he did not keep his promise, something bad might happen to him, and he really did not want to lie to the kind priest. When he arrived at the church, he saw that the young priest was training the kittens. He forced them to form a line and waved a paddle in his hand, making the kittens follow his rhythm and meow. Cats can be so obedient too? George was a little confused, but then he thought about it. There was no lack of sorcerers in the world who used cats as their magical pets or familiars. So it was not surprising that priests, who were as mysterious as sorcerers, had mastered similar skills. Besides, this young priest was really something. Before yesterday, he did not believe that a simple jog could make him relax and fall asleep peacefully. When Reynolds noticed that there were guests, he ended his morning training and encouraged the kittens. "You guys have to work hard. We don't have many people here, so we're counting on you guys to help us out. In my hometown, cats are very magical creatures. They can cook, clean, mine, and fight with terrifying dragons. They can even send their severely injured owners back to their campsites on handcarts. They can even transform into cute, beautiful girls. So, you have to believe in yourselves. As long as you work hard, you can do it. Didn't someone with such poor talent like me learn the divine arts?" After Reynolds finished speaking, he waved his hand to signal for the kittens to disperse and walked towards George. George hurriedly handed him 10 silver coins and promised to come back at night. However, he did not mention anything about joining the church. He turned around and left in a hurry. Reynolds wasn't in a hurry. This person couldn't run away. Once he was addicted to the thrill of exercise, it wouldn't be easy to stop. Just like himself, if he didn't exercise every day, he would feel that something was missing in his life. The old bishop, on the other hand, was more cunning. Every time Reynolds asked him to train with him, he would always use all kinds of excuses to refuse. For the next 3 days, George would come over every night and bring money with him. However, Reynolds did not cast any more magic spells on him. He only asked George to do what he could and not try to be brave and hurt himself. Training was, after all, one's own business. What one relied on was one's own body. If one relied on divine arts, how could it be called training? Although George did not run as well as he did on the first night, the results were not bad. The worries in his heart began to lessen. He could sleep soundly every night and was much more energetic during the day. Everything was going well. He even planned to tell a few of his friends who were also experiencing a midlife crisis to run with him and then find a suitable opportunity to join Mia's church. Unfortunately, George did not come on the 4th night. On the morning of the 5th day, Reynolds suddenly received news of his death. The news was brought by Undine. George had died in his own house. "I'm sorry. I've been so busy recently that I didn't have time to visit you. Who would have thought that something like this would happen to me today?" "Let's talk about the details on the way," Undine said softly. She threw another 20 silver coins into the gift box. Half of it was a gift for moving into the new house, and the other half was Reynolds's salary for the day. On the way there, she briefly explained the case. According to the neighbor's description, George was acting a little strange yesterday. He came home early from the construction site and locked himself in his room. He did not go out for a run at night. His face, which had obviously improved in the past few days, became gloomy again. In the end, he died in front of his desk that night. Then, he lived alone. It was only when the servant came to clean the house that they found that he seemed to be writing a letter to someone. However, the letter had turned into ashes and was scattered everywhere. It was as if he had burned it himself. "Have you informed his family?" Renaud asked. "His wife has a boy toy outside and the child is not her own. His parents have passed away long ago and he has not contacted any other relatives for many years. We don't know who to inform at the moment." What a pitiful man! Undine couldn't help but sigh. She then said, "That's right. I heard from his neighbor that he has been coming to your church a lot recently and has been getting a lot of relief and guidance. You seem to be trying to turn him into a believer?" Reynolds nodded and said truthfully, He wanted to invite a few more friends to join the church, but this happened. He may have all kinds of small problems and used some competitive business methods, but he still shouldn't have died like this. While the two of them were chatting, they soon arrived at George's residence. His body was still in its original state, lying on the desk. There was an empty bottle of wine beside it. He was only wearing pajamas. There were no visible wounds and no bleeding. Even his expression before death was very calm. There were no signs of sudden illness at all. His death was very strange, so the case was handed over to Undine for investigation. As soon as Reynolds stepped into the bedroom, he immediately felt something. He quickly walked behind the body and reached out to tear open his pajamas, revealing his back that had begun to show black spots. Reynolds then cast the divine insight spell, causing his eyes to light up like a flashlight, projecting 2 light spots on the back of the corpse. As his gaze swept across the body, a dark green pattern suddenly appeared on the back of the body. It was a pattern of a dagger piercing through the heart, right at the position of the heart. Reynolds did not need to speak. Even Undine, who was beside him, recognized this notorious pattern. This is a level 5 evil curse, heart-stealing piercing. Chapter 5:16. As one of the most notorious curses, the number of people who had been harmed by it was enough to circle the entire sinless city. This curse was insidious and hidden, and its incubation period was especially long. It could last for as long as a month, and its fluctuations would be eliminated with time, making it almost inaudible. It was very difficult to be detected, and the victim would not be able to sense it. At the same time, it also had some advantages that curses had, such as long-distance control, making it difficult to trace the source of the curse after it was activated, and so on, further enhancing its stealth. Among the various curses, its concealment was definitely ranked at the top. The only weakness of the curse was that it was a little weak. It could only cause cardiac arrest once. If the victim was strong enough or had something to protect them from the curse, they might be able to survive. If the victim was treated in time after the attack, there was also a chance that the victim could be saved. This was the price of concealment, therefore, it was obviously impossible to use this curse to deal with important people and powerhouses. However, it was easy to deal with ordinary people like George. It's these cultists again. Why are they so rampant recently? It would be great if there were a few more cranium crushers in this city. Undine frowned and said unhappily. She then turned to one of her subordinates and asked, "I remember the information said that this curse can only be planted after close contact. Can you investigate who the deceased has been in contact with recently?" This is basically impossible. The deceased was a foreman with dozens of workers under him. He had to come into contact with many people every day. Moreover, this curse has an incubation period of up to a month. It's impossible to investigate, the subordinate said with difficulty. The incubation period was too long. It was difficult for the sheriff to find anything with his investigation method. Undine placed her hopes on Reynolds again and quickly asked, "What do you think?" Reynolds pondered for a moment and suddenly recalled a detail that he had almost overlooked a few days ago. When he was blessing George with the divine spell, he felt a slight obstruction. At that time, he didn't think much about it and thought that it was because he hadn't used these low-level divine spells for too long. But now that he thought about it, it was very likely that the divine spell had collided with the curse and dispelled it. In other words, George's body had been cursed earlier. It should have been a long time ago, so Reynolds did not feel anything strange. After that, it was accidentally dispelled. The murderer planted it again and finally killed George with a curse. If it was a newly planted curse, its evil energy wave would not dissipate so quickly, and the concealment effect would not be too excessive. At least, Reynolds was confident that he would be able to detect it. However, when he saw George a few nights ago, Reynolds did not notice anything strange, which meant that the second curse should have been planted yesterday. Therefore, the moment Reynolds entered the room, he immediately felt that something was wrong. This way, the scope of the investigation could be greatly reduced. According to the neighbors, George seemed to have gone out in the morning yesterday, and did not go out after that. Reynolds thought to himself, and quickly sorted out the logic. He then hurriedly mentioned this important discovery, and asked the sheriffs to continue investigating based on this clue. Undine's spirit couldn't help but be refreshed. She couldn't help but praise. Although your thoughts are occasionally strange, when it comes to human lives, you're still very reliable. Working with you was the right choice. After that, she quickly assigned tasks to her subordinates, asking them to question George's workers and neighbors to find out where he went yesterday. Reynolds looked at the sheriffs busy. First, he cast a soothing theurgy to send George's soul to rest in peace. This time, he did not imitate Mithrin's method of doing anything fancy. Instead, he used the simplest soothing theurgy. George had made offerings to the goddess and had plans to join the church. He could be considered a quasi-believer of the church, so he should follow some of the church's teachings, be humble, and keep a low profile. He was not suitable for such a grand occasion. As the soothing theurgy was cast, the shadow of George's soul appeared out of thin air, looking exceptionally peaceful. It's okay. I'll send the murderer to see you soon and let him repent to you, Reynolds said in his heart. In fact, he had noticed a detail before, but he did not tell Undine and the others. The murderer could plant the curse without anyone noticing. Obviously, he had a very clear understanding of its performance. He should also know that the curse just planted would not be so subtle, but he still could not wait to activate it. It was very likely that George had discovered some important secret, so the murderer had to kill him quickly to silence him. If he couldn't catch the culprit quickly, he would have to escape with the secret. I remember George said that he took on the job of an archaeologist a month ago. Reynolds continued to ponder. Archaeologists had always been one of the cultists' favorite disguises. They often used archaeology as an excuse to hire people to secretly dig up the tombs of evil gods or build altars. After that, they would sacrifice all the workers. Similar tragedies had happened many times. A month's time coincided with the incubation period of the curse. He asked Undine for the investigation report and looked at it. There was a statement from George's assistant, mentioning that they had worked for an archaeologist named Sandro. Because the ancient site to be excavated was a little far from the sinless city, the progress had been very slow. Many people's hands were held back, and George was very anxious about it. Reynolds had heard of Sandro before. He was considered a somewhat famous person in the city, and he often saw his name in the newspapers. It was just that his academic achievements were far inferior to his social achievements. No one had heard of him producing any outstanding academic result. On the contrary, he often attended various public events to make himself known. It was said that he had a close personal relationship with many important people in private. For a small sheriff like Undine, it was difficult for her to investigate this kind of person. George was just a small fry, and other than Reynolds, no one would care about his life or death. Therefore, this kind of thing should be left to Cranium Crusher. Reynolds said in his heart, but he did not mention it to Undine. After the routine work here was done, Undine quickly brought her men to continue the investigation. Reynolds returned to the church alone and told the elderly bishop about the matter. The elderly bishop listened in silence and habitually took out his divination tools, but he quickly reminded Klein, "Don't worry." However, he quickly reminded, "The other party is a person of status. Won't it be bad for you to just go there?" "Don't worry. Do you think I'm the kind of person who doesn't know what's important?" Renaud said confidently. Chapter 5:17. The results of the old bishop's divination indicated that the historian called Sandro was currently in the northwest of the Sinless City, near a place called the Ruins Excavation Site, about 50 kilometers away from the city. Even further to the northwest, there was a huge wasteland known as the Abandoned Ruins of the Gods. It was extremely vast and extended all the way north to the Arctic ice field. There were countless secrets and dangers hidden within it. Even now, humans had not been able to see the full picture of it. The Ruins Excavation Site was only at the outermost edge of the Abandoned Ruins of Gods. It was considered relatively safe, so it attracted many archaeologists, explorers, and tomb raiders. Reynolds arrived at the location provided by the old bishop in the evening. It was not in the Ruins Excavation Site, but at the edge of the area, next to a beautiful lake. There was also a secluded grove and a villa nearby. Someone had actually built a villa in such a place? Although it was surrounded by mountains and rivers, and the scenery was pleasant, it was next to the dangerous and mysterious Abandoned Ruins of God. Who knew if some monster or monster would suddenly jump out and snatch someone away? It was also because of the location of the Abandoned Ruins of Gods that even in the faraway Sinless City, the land prices in the north and west were the lowest. Only the poor lived there, while the rich and middle class lived in the south and east. There is indeed something fishy. Even I would not live in such a place. Reynolds found a secluded hillside nearby and squatted down. He activated the divine spell, Insight, and observed the villa from a distance. As expected, the interior was filled with lush greenery that complemented the scenery outside. This was a cult stronghold. How filthy! How evil! No wonder they are not afraid of the monsters emerging from the ruins, because they are demons themselves. I really want to activate the heavenly punishment sacred sword and wipe them all out. But no, I am a person who knows my priorities. I have to find out the conspiracy and purpose of these cultists first. I'd better wait for it to get dark and sneak in. Although I am a priest, my skills in infiltration have reached perfection. Reynolds muttered to himself, lying down on the hillside and taking out his dinner for the day. Now that his days were better and he had money in his pocket, he could live a little more extravagantly. He did not have to eat potatoes anymore, so Reynolds's dinner today was a sandwich. It was made for him by the old bishop, not by the kitten. The meat inside was also fried beef, not the meat of the kitten. Reynolds ate slowly, patiently waiting for the sky to darken. Amia, who had come with him, sat on the ground like a duck. She carefully stretched out her thick fingers, trying to catch a grasshopper hiding in the grass. After the sky turned dark, Reynolds changed into Cranium Crusher's attire, and instructed Amia. "I'll go in first. You stay outside and wait for orders. Remember to act according to the situation." Amia didn't answer. He didn't know if she understood. Reynolds then walked towards the villa. However, halfway through, he turned around and looked at Nana helplessly. It hunched its huge body and curled its arms, trying its best to imitate the tiptoeing manner of humans as it followed closely behind Reynolds. "Didn't I tell you to wait for orders and act according to the situation?" Amia's eyes lit up as if she didn't understand. "Forget it. Since you want to follow me, then watch carefully. Learn well and remember to act according to my mood." As Reynolds spoke, he cast a few more divine spells on Amia to make her voice softer. Reynolds had not heard of any other church that had divine spells that facilitated stealth. He didn't know what kind of divine spell it was, but it was definitely not a healing type. He didn't know where the old bishop had found it. He felt sorry for the priests of other churches who didn't even know how to sneak around. Reynolds brought Amia and sneaked up to the outer wall of the villa. With a sudden push of his feet, he leaped over the wall. Amia didn't know how to jump, so she maintained her sneaky posture. She smashed her head through the wall and tiptoed inside. The commotion of crashing through the wall naturally attracted the attention of the guards. "Something's not right. Who is it? Damn it, I was discovered so quickly. I shouldn't have brought Amia along. She was too big of a target and her movements were too rough. Reynolds couldn't help but feel regret. However, the two pike-wielding guards directly rushed towards him and asked in a stern voice, "What are you doing? Who are you? Why are you trespassing on private property? Wow! Why is your mule so big?" "Sigh, since I've been discovered, there's nothing I can do. You forced my hand." As Reynolds spoke, he snapped his fingers twice in a row and said in a clear voice, "Repent of your sins." The faces of the two guards instantly twisted. Their eyes gradually became confused. Their bodies were enveloped by a faint white light as they slowly knelt on the ground. However, a green mist suddenly gushed out of their bodies and confronted the white light. "Why aren't you willing to repent of your sins and welcome a new life?" Reynolds said in confusion. He then snapped his fingers a few more times. The white light on the guard's body suddenly shone brightly, suppressing the green fog in an instant, and the two people's faces gradually became calm and peaceful. In the next second, their heads suddenly exploded. Yellow, red, and white matter scattered on the ground like a broken dye vat. Although you resisted and repented, you still have some awareness. You know that you don't have the face to live in this world, and chose to commit suicide, Reynolds muttered under his breath. Although he had successfully taken care of the two guards, the commotion caused was enough to alert the others. Cries of alarm rang out in the villa. "Ah, ah, ah! There's an intruder! Prepare for battle! Protect Master Sandro! There are only two intruders! Oh no, there's only one person and a mule!" Following the cries of surprise, over 100 guards swarmed out of the not-so-large villa and surrounded Reynolds and Amia in layers. In addition to conventional weapons such as spears and machetes, some of them were holding heavy crossbows and were even wearing heavy armor. As everyone knew, heavy crossbows and heavy armor were military-controlled items. They were not something that civilian guards could possess. A normal person would not bring more than 100 guards with them at all times. Seeing that Reynolds was a turtle in a jar and could not escape, the owner of the villa, the historian Andrew, appeared on the balcony on the second floor of the villa under the protection of two mages wearing robes and holding staffs. Chapter 518. Sandro, the archaeologist, looked to be in his 40s. He was dressed in the most fashionable gentleman attire in the city and held a short staff inlaid with skulls. He was looking down at Reynolds with the attitude of a victor. "Ha ha 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 ha!" He looked at Reynolds, who was surrounded and had given up resisting, and laughed heartily, thinking that victory was already in his hands. "Cranium Crusher, ever since I heard of your deeds, I expected you to come to me sooner or later, so I made all kinds of preparations half a month in advance. I didn't expect you to come knocking on my door." "Humph. I knew there would be a mole. You got the news from him, so you came knocking on my door, right? Unfortunately, you came too late. Today, our plan is about to succeed, and you can't do anything anymore." Reynolds listened and felt a little strange. What plan? What half a month in advance? Who is the mole? Is this guy talking to me or not? Sandro saw that Reynolds did not reply and thought that he had been scared, so he continued. "Who told you about our plan? If you are willing to tell me, I can consider giving you a dignified death." "No. Why do I feel like this guy has misunderstood something?" Reynolds cursed in his heart, but he did not have time to think too much. He immediately replied, "All of you, listen up. You are surrounded by me. I advise you to put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Repent your sins." There was a burst of laughter from the surroundings. Sandro also showed a disdainful sneer. "Hee, I didn't expect the legendary Cranium Crusher to be a lunatic. Talking to a lunatic is a waste of time. Kill him." The guards stopped laughing, raised their spears, and stabbed at Reynolds as if they wanted to stab him into a beehive. But suddenly, more than 10 triangular shields appeared in front of Reynolds and spun rapidly around him, blocking the spears one by one. Divine art? So you are a paladin. Unfortunately, there is a limit to divine art. I have so many people here. How long can your divine art last? Kill his mule first, Sandro ordered with a cold smile. Renaud abruptly raised his head and retorted with great indignation. How can you be so evil? You killed my believers and now you want to kill me. You won't even let my donkey go. You're so evil. There's no need to talk about morality when dealing with an evil demon like you. Amia, let's attack together. Amia, hurry up and use the water splash. Oh no, hurry up and use 100,000 horsepower. Upon hearing Reynolds's command, Nana's eyes turned red. She no longer maintained her sneaky posture and stood up straight. She stretched out her arms and crossed them in front of her chest, ready for battle. However, from an outsider's point of view, it was as if a mule had stood up on its hind legs and raised its front hooves, looking as if it was about to fight with someone. To be honest, this scene was a little comical. Even the circus couldn't train such a mule. It made people want to laugh. But in the next second, they saw the mule's legs kick hard and charge into the crowd like a cannonball. In an instant, several guards were sent flying and fell to the ground weakly. Their chests caved in and they stopped breathing on the spot. Then, Amia raised her arms and spread out. Her upper body spun at high speed and her huge body turned into a whirlwind of death, sweeping towards the remaining guards. The guards were shocked. They shouted in unison, and the green evil mist rose from their bodies. But although this mist could block divine arts and slightly strengthen their physique and strength, it could be considered as a buff. But Reynolds had cast more than 30 divine arts on Amia. Among them, there was no lack of powerful divine arts, such as Valor's Inspiration, Valor's Hymn, Divine Strength, Vanquisher's Blade, Agility, and so on. All of them were level 5. Reynolds didn't like to use low-level divine art. But Amia was his beloved donkey. How could he not protect her? If these divine arts were cast on a human, they would probably lose their mind in an instant and become a tireless and fearless war machine. They wouldn't stop until they died of exhaustion. But Amia was a magic puppet and was not affected by these side effects. She could let Reynolds do whatever he wanted. And how could the simple strengthening effects on these guards be compared to her? Not to mention that their original strength and physical strength were not as good as Amia's magic puppet. Therefore, even though these guards had turned green and looked rather frightening, the moment Amia touched them, the crisp sound of bones cracking and a series of wails would be heard. The guards were like weightless dust as they were blown away in batches. They tried to fight back, but the weapons they waved and the arrows they shot seemed to have hit a stone. They only splashed out a little sparks and didn't leave any trace. In less than a minute, the 100 or so guards who were aggressive were killed. Amia was like a terrifying meat grinder, cleaning them up like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Some people wanted to escape, but how could they compare to Amia's speed? Even the crossbowmen who were standing a little further away had their skulls crushed in its hands. Amia, who had been blessed by Reynolds with divine arts, did not even have the flaw of being cumbersome. She was even more agile than a human and could be called a perfect war machine. So if it wasn't for the other party forcing him, Reynolds wouldn't have wanted to use her. And he was also wary of any tricks Zendral had up his sleeve. He was also wary of the 2 sorcerers who hadn't made a move yet, so he didn't rush to make a move. When dealing with a cunning sorcerer, he had to be extra careful, extra cautious. On the rooftop, Zendral was dumbfounded. What kind of mule is this? Why is it so fierce? Is it a chimera disguised as a mule? If a mule is so strong, how strong would a cranium crusher be? Is this kid really that terrifying? Zendral was almost scared out of his wits. He quickly ordered the 10 heavily armored elite guards to stop Reynolds, while he let the 2 sorcerers carry him away. He hadn't lost yet. He still had a trump card. As long as he found that lord, be it a mule or a cranium crusher, they were all ants. The two sorcerers quickly cast levitation spells, one on the left and one on the right, and flew in the direction of the ruins excavation site. Reynolds was stunned when he saw them escape. He quickly scolded, "Run away! If you can't win, then run. You can't be as bad as you." As he said that, he picked up a broken spear from the ground with one hand and started making hand signs with the other. Chapter 5:19. With the release of the divine spell, the broken spear in Reynolds' hand burned with a pure white holy flame, looking like a holy torch. Eric, who was being held back by two sorcerers, had been paying attention to Reynolds' movements. He quickly shouted, "Be careful!" The two sorcerers were slightly stunned. They quickly worked together to hold up a magic barrier, and quickly comforted him. "This is a long-range defensive barrier, enough to block any." Unfortunately, before they could finish their words, Reynolds had already waved his hand and threw out the broken spear. The broken spear drew a thin white line in the night sky and hit the barrier in an instant. The barrier was as fragile as an eggshell in front of the enormous power and the burning holy flames. It was easily penetrated, and the mage's chest was pierced through. The mage's unfinished words were stuck in his throat, and in the end, he turned into a flash of light in the sky. The sorcerer fell from the sky powerlessly. In the process of falling, the holy flame spewed out from the wound on his chest, turning his body into dust in an instant. Eric was a little dumbfounded. That was a living person. A noble sorcerer who was the disciple of the great sorcerer Venner. Yesterday they were chatting, drinking, and playing with women, but in the blink of an eye, there was not even a corpse left. He felt a deep sense of fear engulfing him. Even when he was facing that noble and powerful existence, he did not have such a feeling of fear. What the hell is this cranium crusher? Why is he so terrifying? He quickly grabbed the other sorcerer's shoulder and urged sternly, "Faster! Faster! While the elite guards are holding him back, we must hurry back to the ruins. Only that lord can protect us." The mage could only nod his head with difficulty. He was only a grade 4 advanced mage, and had not mastered levitation for long. If he were to fly by himself, he could guarantee his speed, but with a heavy burden, there was no way he could increase his speed. If he had not noticed that the cranium crusher was not chasing after him, he would have left Eric behind and fled back to Venner's sorcerer tower. The reason why Reynolds was not in a hurry to chase after him was not because he was stopped by the heavily armored guards, but because he was cautious. He felt that Eric was too decisive in fleeing. He didn't even have the slightest bit of fighting spirit. He hadn't even made a move yet, and he was already in a hurry to escape? Where are your hot-blooded courage and friendship? There might be a trap here. The other party was a cunning cultist and had a sinister mage by his side. He had to be careful. But of course, he couldn't let him go just like that. He was such a cruel and vicious cultist, and he definitely couldn't let him go. It wasn't easy for him to recruit a follower, and if he was killed by him, who knew if he would hurt other followers? Eric had to die. So he patiently waited for Amia to turn the elite guards into bloody tin cans. Only then did he jump onto the magic puppet's back, pointed in the direction Eric had fled, and commanded, "Let's go! Let's chase!" After saying that, he quickly formed a hand seal and released a few holy flames, which landed on the surrounding corpses. The holy flames would automatically pursue evil and burn it to ashes. This villa that was full of filth and evil was its fuel. It would quickly clean up the scene to avoid any misunderstandings. Amia also took large strides and ran at high speed. Before the holy flames burned the entire villa, she ran out with Reynolds and chased after Eric in the sky. "He's flying so slowly? It's like he's purposely luring me to chase after him. There really is an ambush on the way. We must be more careful. I'll cast some divine spells on you." Reynold looked at Eric, who was flying slowly in the sky. He chased after him while casting divine spells on himself and Amia. Just like that, he kept a safe distance until he saw Eric and Amia land in an excavation site. He hurriedly fled in. It looked like they were digging an underground tomb. There were a few mine-like holes in the surroundings that led to the excavation site. Reynold watched Eric escape into the hole and carefully looked inside. He wasn't in a hurry to chase after him. Amia, you must remember, don't go in caverns with complicated terrain like this. It's likely to be a trap set by the enemy. Countless powerful female knights and female elves have mistakenly entered caverns like this and fell into traps. In the end, they ended up as captives of the orcs and goblins. Their fates were horrible, so in this situation, the best way is to dismantle it. After saying that, Reynold made the magic puppet retreat slightly. He lit up his eyes and searched around the excavation site. He quickly found what he was looking for. It was a large cylindrical stone mill. It was probably used by the workers to flatten the surrounding road. He quickly walked in front of the stone mill and tried to lift it. It was indeed very heavy. He could only lift it a little. "Sigh, I'm just a priest. Strength is not my forte," Reynolds said as he cast a divine power on himself. His strength instantly increased by several times. He could easily lift the stone mill above his head. "At times like this, I guess I'll have to rely on the almighty divine spells." Carrying the stone mill, he walked to the top of the excavation site. According to the directions of the caves, he roughly estimated the location of the excavation site. He then drew a circle on the ground and began to make a series of hand seals. He was ready to cast a Tier 7 divine spell of punishment, Divine Might. This was also a divine spell that was not circulated in the outside world. It was more special. It was mainly used to deal with fortifications and besieged cities. It was very suitable for the current situation. Why would the elegant and easygoing Church of Mia keep such a divine spell? However, this did not stop Reynold from feeling sorry for the priests of other churches. When they were hunting down enemies in the future, it would be very difficult for them to escape into bunkers or caves. As Reynolds' hands moved up and down, the stone mill began to emit a faint white light. It was getting brighter and brighter. It looked like there was some kind of energy gathering inside it that could explode at any time. Reynolds cast 3 divine might on the stone mill. When he felt that it was enough, he raised it above his head again and began to chant a modified prayer. "Goddess, please give me strength. This enemy is worth fighting. Let him feel your divine might. Takizawa Laura." He let out a strange cry and threw the stone mill towards the circle that he had drawn on the ground. Then, he quickly turned around and ran with Amia towards a nearby ravine. Chapter 520. Then, a thunderous boom came from behind him. The stone roller fell to the ground, and the divine spell on it was fully activated. The ground began to tremble as if there was an earthquake. With the stone roller as the center, cracks appeared on the ground and quickly spread in all directions. Accompanied by a series of loud booms, the ground began to sink rapidly. The surrounding rock walls began to collapse and crack, forming a huge crater in the ground as if a meteor had crashed into it. It looked as if the ground could no longer bear the weight of the stone roller. Reynolds intended to use this divine spell to collapse the entire underground excavation site and bury Eric alive. According to the old book that recorded this divine spell, it could distort the surrounding gravity and destroy the internal structure of a building. It was originally used to attack fixed fortifications such as castles. Generally speaking, it needed to be used in conjunction with siege weapons such as catapult. According to the book, this divine art was classified as a war divine art. It was a special classification that other churches did not have. Although it was only at the 7th level, Reynolds practiced it slower than other 7th level divine art. It took him 5 days to learn it. This time was second only to the heavenly punishment sacred sword. He felt that this was because he had always been gentle, easygoing, and kind to others. War divine spell, on the other hand, sounded very violent and did not match his style. That was why he took so long to learn it. This divine spell could not make people repent and atone for their sins. It was also inconvenient to kill people. It was not very useful. Today was a special occasion, so he used it to try. This way, I can bury that despicable Eric alive, right? His traps and traps won't be of any use now. Amia, did you learn it? Reynolds poked his head out from behind the mountain wall and looked around. He was satisfied with the power of this divine spell. Just as he was about to use the divine spell, Eric, who had escaped into the tunnel, was running with the sorcerer toward the deepest ancient altar. That was the biggest secret of this excavation site. In order to protect this secret, he had hired several engineering teams and had them dig in the wrong direction to create a complicated underground maze. Other than himself, no one would be able to find their way in. He believed that this underground maze would be enough to stop Skull Crusher and buy him enough time to summon his trump card. As expected, Skull Crusher did not chase after him. He was probably stopped by the maze, allowing him to reach the ancient altar safely. The altar was located in an underground cave. The walls around it were engraved with images of various monsters. In the middle of the cave stood an arched door made of black stones. There were all kinds of complicated and evil runes carved on it. Beside the black stone arch, there was a demon statue with horns on its head and wings on its back. It was the statue of the seventh demon king of the abyss, Cyrus. Even though it was a demon king of the abyss, its power and status were no weaker than the weaker evil gods. Legend had it that it was the fifth son of Es, the mother of desire, and had countless gigolos. At the same time, it was also the father and elder brother of the Tree of Moros, the Pillar of Lies. The rich circle is really messy. Eric knelt down and prayed to the statue. He soon received a response. The Demon King promised to send his best men to help him. The runes on the black arched door lit up one by one, and a thick green mist rose from the door. It kept twisting and turning, vaguely forming a certain shape. It looked as if something was going to pass through the door and descend into the human world. At that moment, the cave began to tremble violently. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. But Eric did not panic at all. He thought that this was a normal reaction when a demon descended into the world. It meant that this demon was very powerful and could definitely crush Skull Crusher and his donkey. As the trembling intensified, rocks and sand fell from the ceiling. The sorcerer was not careful and had his head crushed by the rock. He died instantly. But Eric was still fearless. He continued to kneel in front of the statue and recite the name of the Demon King. Finally, a huge and ferocious body emerged from the black stone arch. It was 3 meters tall and had a terrifying head that looked like both a wild boar and a crocodile. Its mouth was wide open, revealing rows of fine and sharp teeth. It was wearing a purplish-black armor that was constantly burning with green evil flames. In its hand was a huge chopper that looked like a saw. This was a tyrant demon, the most violent, bloodthirsty, and cruel demon in the abyss of hell. Not only was it strong and had thick skin and flesh, it also had a decent level of magic. Even among high-grade demons, it was one of the strongest. Legend had it that a tyrant demon could easily slaughter an entire human army and destroy a city. It was the embodiment of destruction and disaster. The earth trembles beneath my feet. The world trembles because of me. The tyrant demon roared in the demon language. It completely ignored the collapsing cave and looked at Eric, who was kneeling on the ground. It then switched to a less standard human language. "Are you the one who summoned me, worm?" Eric raised his head slightly and quickly said, "Hey! Watch out." The tyrant demon was taken aback. It quickly looked up and saw a huge stone mill coming down on its face. The mill emitted a thick and disgusting holy aura. Ouch! The tyrant demon could not dodge in time. The stone mill, which had become as heavy as a mountain, smashed into its face. Its head was instantly smashed into mush. Its body was also crushed by the gravitational force around the mill. It was reduced to a pile of mush in an instant. Mighty as a mountain, even though the tyrant demon was known for its thick skin, it could not take it head-on. Eric was dumbfounded by what he saw. He did not even brag for more than 3 sentences. How did it end so quickly? When the effects of the divine spell ended and the tremors stopped, Reynolds and Amia climbed to the edge of the crater that was more than 100 meters in diameter to check the situation below. He discovered the strange black arched door and the demon's statue next to it. They were actually unharmed in this calamitous catastrophe? The stone mill was stuck in the middle of the stone arch. It looked like it had completely blocked it. The glowing runes on the stone arch were extinguished. It was quiet. Reynolds quickly slid down the wall of the crater. He wanted to see how the stone arch and the statue could be so sturdy. But when he got close to the statue, he heard a wail. He looked down. Eric was pressed down by a huge rock. He was lying on the ground, gasping for breath. Although he was still alive, he was barely alive. He had completely lost the ability to resist and escape. Chapter 5:21. Reynolds moved the boulder on Andre's body away, giving him some strength to speak. Andre wept bitterly on the spot and begged him for mercy. "Please, I beg you, spare my life. I'll tell you everything. I'll give you all my wealth." How could he dare to resist? The stone grinder that fell from the sky had instantly shattered his hope. The trump card in his plan had been crushed into powder before he could even say 3 words. He could not figure out how this person could accurately smash the stone roller into the tyrant devil's face from such a deep rock formation. In fact, it was not that Reynolds was accurate. It was just that divine might mountain, a divine art that could destroy enemy fortifications, had a simple guidance function. It would automatically head to the key area inside the building, which was the black stone arch. The tyrant devil just happened to be standing in front of the door. Reynolds was not in a hurry to ask. Instead, he looked at the statue beside him. He had a strange feeling that the statue seemed to be alive and was looking down at him from above. It was as if a powerful existence from afar was observing and sizing him up through the statue. Reynolds remembered that the old bishop had once explained to him that this was a method called the descent of consciousness. Those powerful beings could divide some of their consciousness and vision, and through the medium of sculptures and tokens, they could observe, peek, and communicate from a distance. They could even use part of their power. Reynolds looked up and met the gaze of the statue. He felt that there was a strong anger in its cold eyes, as if it was warning him. Reynolds was frightened. He hurriedly sprayed a stream of holy flame on the statue's face. The consciousness that descended through the air instantly disappeared, and the originally sturdy statue instantly turned into a sand sculpture, disintegrating into a pile of powder on the spot and dissipating with the wind. Even the black stone arch behind it collapsed, and the entire ancient altar was completely destroyed. In fact, they had been crushed by the divine art's gravitational distortion. They were barely holding on by relying on the demon king's consciousness. Reynolds was slightly relieved. He sighed softly in a voice that only he could hear. "These demons are indeed ferocious. Its gaze just now was as if it wanted to kill my entire family. I only have the old bishop and the kitten at home. I have elders and children to take care of. How could it not let me go? But I, Reynolds, will not be afraid. I swear to fight it to the end. When I get back, I'll write an anonymous letter to the 3 major churches and expose the crimes of this devil king." Andre, who was lying on the ground, was scared witless. This strange and terrifying cranium crusher was actually able to disperse a strand of the demon king's consciousness. Although that wisp of consciousness wasn't powerful, It originated from a genuine abyssal demon king, the descendant of an evil god. Its status was extremely high, and it wasn't something that could be dealt with by brute force. When ordinary powerhouses faced it, due to the difference in status, they would instinctively kneel down and worship it, not daring to resist at all. But not only was this skull crusher not afraid, he even dared to resist? Just what level of expert was he? Legendary? Was it some archbishop of the Orthodox Church? Andrei quickly tried to recall which sect's archbishop would be so free as to come to the Sinless City to play a role-playing game. However, Reynolds did not give him much time to think. After dealing with the statue, Reynolds immediately turned around and said to him, "Tell me everything you know." In order to survive, Andrei endured the pain on his body and told Reynolds everything he knew. He wasn't an unyielding member of the evil cult. Instead, he was a typical fence-sitter who went with the flow. Before he started working for the evil cult, he often considered himself a devout member of the Holy Light. That was why he was able to survive in the upper-class circle of the Sinless City. However, when he discovered the ancient altar during the archaeological process, he betrayed his original beliefs and began to act according to the will of the Demon King. As far as he knew, the Demon King Cyrus and the evil god tree of Moros seemed to be planning to prove their worth to their mother and lover, the child mother of Desire. They were planning to make a big news in the Sinless City. The two of them secretly developed their strength and cultivated believers. They actively responded to the prayers and carried out their respective plans. Sending out evil cult members to rope in and collude with the low-level officials of the Sinless City, as well as reactivating the ancient altar, were all part of the plan. They were the preliminary preparations. However, a cranium crusher suddenly appeared and killed all of Moro's believers. Then, he destroyed the ancient altar, completely ruining their plans. Andrei couldn't figure out who leaked the information to the cranium crusher, allowing him to know so much about the plan. Every time he made a move, he would destroy the key points of the plan. He didn't dare to ask, but the cranium crusher took the initiative to ask. "Why are you looking for trouble with the shining sword?" The shining sword. Andrei was stunned. It took him a while to remember what was going on. He quickly explained. It turned out that interfering with the shining sword's bidding was just a small interlude in the process. The evil cult members needed a large amount of funds for their activities, so they set their sights on the shining sword. The shining sword's business was booming day by day, but they didn't have any backing. They wanted to force the owner to submit to them. They took the initiative to bribe the owner, and even split the high profits of the order with them. However, the owner, Bart, was a righteous man and didn't submit. Just as they were planning to kidnap the owner's family and teach him a lesson, the cranium crusher suddenly appeared and killed an important adorer. The evil cult members thought that their plan had been exposed, so they quickly dealt with the officials that they had recruited and prepared to lay low for a while. In the end, they still couldn't escape the cranium crusher's clutches. The newly established evil cult was uprooted overnight. Andrei never thought that the cranium crusher would kill over such a small interlude. "If we knew that the shining sword was your property, we wouldn't have dared to do anything to it. Speaking of which, aren't you a clergyman? Why are you so violent?" Renaud then asked. "Why did you kill George?" "George?" Andrei thought for a while before he remembered the name. That little foreman accidentally discovered the secret of the altar. To silence him, I had no choice but to kill him. In his eyes, George was just a small fry, an ant-like existence. It didn't matter if he killed him. He also didn't think that this person would be related to the cranium crusher. Andrei then realized that the cranium crusher probably didn't even know about his plan. Why did he come looking for trouble over such a trivial matter? No, as a powerful and influential figure, why would you pay attention to such trivial matters? Chapter 522. André did not understand why Cranium Crusher would go on a killing spree over such a trivial matter. He did not know the predicament that Mia's cult was in. Up until now, Mia's cult had a total of 9 followers: John and his son, the old carpenter, the shopkeeper's family of 3, 2 old folks who lived in the countryside, and a traveling merchant who was rarely seen. If George had been the last to join the cult, the number of followers would have broken through the double digits. It was a shame that André had ruined such an important progress. They had lost 1/10 of their followers, which was a heavy blow. It was only natural that Renaud would seek revenge. Of course, Renaud would not explain this to his enemy. He continued to ask other questions, including what André was doing in the hole. When he heard that André had summoned a tyrannical demon to deal with him, his eyes behind the mask glowed. "You are too despicable, too shameless. Where is that tyrannical demon? I will not allow this demon to wreak havoc in the human world. I will stop it even if it means risking my life. You crushed it to a pulp as soon as it was born. What do you mean by risking your life?" André was speechless. He pointed at the pile of flesh not far away. The stone mill that had crushed the tyrannical demon to death had also been reduced to dust after the theurgy had lost its effect. It was now mixed with the remains of the tyrannical demon. Renaud hurried over, ignoring the mess on the ground. He lowered his head and rummaged through the remains. What a waste! It was so hard to find a demon, and it was reduced to dust just like that. In the sect's underground library, there was a book that looked like a monster encyclopedia. It recorded high-level demons like the tyrannical devil. Aside from its immense strength, thick skin, and ferocious nature, it was also very valuable. Many of its organs and tissues could be used to make high-grade equipment. A complete tyrannical demon's corpse could be sold for at least 2,000 to 3,000 gold coins. If it was alive, the price would be even higher. Back then, when he was so poor that he could only eat potatoes, Reynolds had always been secretly hoping that some ignorant cult would recruit some high-value demons to improve his life. Although it didn't violate the doctrine, it wasn't a good thing for a demon to descend into the world. Therefore, he only dared to think about it secretly and didn't dare to say it out loud. In the end, he had finally encountered it once, but before he could even see its face, it had turned into a pile of minced meat. It could be said that it was worthless. He couldn't even feed it to the kittens. Renaud immediately felt his heart ache. He scolded André in exasperation. "Since you're already so sinister and vicious, can't you summon a more powerful demon?" "No. André was at a loss for words. Fortunately, Reynolds carefully searched for a while, and finally found something. He found a piece of purplish-black meat. It was the heart of a tyrannical demon. Although it had stopped beating, it was still intact. The evil aura that should have been there had also been purified by the divine spell. The fact that the heart could remain intact under the powerful gravity field was enough to prove how sturdy it was. It was also the most valuable part of the tyrannical demon's body. Many mages would bid for it. It was worth it. Renaud put the tyrannical demon's heart away with satisfaction. He continued to ask André a few more questions, mainly about whether the father and son duo had any other schemes. André was only a middle-level member. That was all he knew. He had already told Renaud everything. Throughout the questioning, Renaud used a lie detection divine spell, the same kind that Undine used to collect testimonies to ensure that André wasn't lying. "All right, we've more or less understood the situation. You should repent and turn over a new leaf," Renaud said at last. André couldn't help but feel elated. Although this cranium crusher was powerful, he wasn't cruel enough. He actually spared his life? Of course, now was the time to pretend to repent. As long as he could keep his life, he could go back and find his important friends. Unfortunately, before he could think about it, he heard a crisp snap of a finger. After a dull thud, Renaud lowered his head to look at André's corpse and muttered, "That's right," he muttered, Looks like you know your sins and have chosen to turn over a new leaf. With that, he sprayed holy flames on the corpse to destroy it. Then, he jumped onto Amelia's back and returned to Sinless City. Not long after he left, a few groups of holy knights and crusaders covered a few carriages and arrived at the excavation site. These were the troops of the 3 major Orthodox churches. The group was huge, and there were at least 1,000 of them. When the tyrannical demon descended, the 3 major Orthodox churches in Sinless City all received a warning. They quickly gathered their men and rushed over in the middle of the night, ready to fight a bloody battle with the demon. Red-robed Bishop Yek even personally led a team to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Unfortunately, they only saw a clean battlefield. There wasn't even a corpse left. Bishop Yek jumped off the carriage, closed his eyes, and carefully sensed the residual energy waves in the air. After a while, he opened his eyes and said, "There's holy flames. There's the fluctuation of holy flames, and there's also a somewhat unfamiliar fluctuation. If I remember correctly, it seems to be an ancient war divine spell?" War divine spell? There's such a type of divine spell? A primordial chaos knight captain asked. He was the leader of the primordial chaos knight. Divine spells originate from faith and the power of the gods. They are omnipotent. Of course, there are more than 4 types. It's just that many of the less commonly used ones have been lost, and the remaining ones have been reclassified. That's why there are only 4 types left. The bishop of the Supreme True God religion, who had met Reynolds once before, explained. Then, he turned to Bishop Yek and asked, "Lord Yek, are you sure this is the effect of a war divine spell?" He pointed at the huge sinkhole in front of him, his eyes filled with deep fear. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "With such power, it's no wonder that war divine spells are forbidden by the gods." Bishop Yek pondered for a while and finally gave a definite answer. "As far as I know, other than war divine spells used to invade cities, no other divine spells below level 8 can cause such an effect. And if a level 8 divine spell was used, we would definitely be able to sense it. In truth, several hundred years ago, when the gods were still at war and the churches on the surface were still fighting against each other, war divine spells were still very common. But later, when the war between the gods came to an end, the gods reached a tacit agreement. The religions tended to coexist peacefully, and all kinds of destructive war divine spells were forbidden by the gods. But no one expected that today, someone would suddenly break the ban. Chapter 5:23. The reappearance of the divine art of war caused the higher-ups of the 3 Orthodox churches to look serious. This was not as simple as someone breaking a taboo and breaking everyone's tacit understanding. No one would be so naive as to think that this was the personal action of a certain clergyman. If there was no instruction from a certain god behind this, how could he learn the long-lost divine art of war? But which god was he serving? What kind of considerations did this god have? Just as the 3 higher-ups were deep in thought, a crusader came over with a puddle of black powder. "This is abyss crystal?" Bishop Yek recognized the origin of the black powder at a glance. "This is the key material to construct the abyss portal. So this is a demon altar? Those filthy monsters intend to invade the human world from here?" And a powerful clergyman discovered their scheme and used the divine art of war to destroy the altar. The bishop of the Supreme True God was very good at drawing inferences from one case and had a rough idea of what had happened. From this, it seems that a certain god has sent his adorer to help us in secret. It seems that he is a low-key good god. The knight captain could not help but sigh in relief and praise. TSK. This power is really enviable. This adorer was able to destroy a demon altar by himself. He is undoubtedly a powerful being. How fascinating! Bishop Yek's expression also relaxed. Since the divine art of war was used to deal with demons, it was fine. Of course, there was no need for tacit understanding when dealing with demons, but he still opened his mouth to remind him. But as far as I know, the divine art of war is extremely difficult to cultivate. Even if it is not forbidden, not many people can learn it. This adorer is undoubtedly a genius in the divine art. But we have not heard anything about him before, a genius with outstanding strength and mastery of powerful divine arts who is willing to conceal his identity and serve a secretive God. His intentions and motives may not be purely to protect the sinless city. It is difficult to fathom. He may not be an enemy, but we still have to be careful. As he spoke, he could not help but think of Reynolds, whom his niece talked about every day. That kid seemed to be a genius in the divine art who concealed his identity and served a mysterious goddess, but when he thought about it carefully, he didn't equate Reynolds with this blessed. Although Reynolds was talented, it was only in the area of modifying divine spells. If he wanted to learn and use war divine spells, even the most talented person would have to spend more than 10 years. Otherwise, he wouldn't even have enough faith power to cast divine spells. This was the limit of a human being, and it was recorded in the history of the Church. Reynolds was only in his teens, so it obviously couldn't be him. However, that kid's talent was also very good. If he was given better resources and more opportunities, he would definitely be able to achieve great things in the future. At that time, he would marry his niece and have a few super genius babies. He would then choose the cutest and most obedient one and teach it carefully from a young age. As Bishop Yek thought about it, a kind smile appeared on his face. Lord Yiku, why are you suddenly laughing? Could it be that there's an answer to the problem? The knight captain asked in confusion. No, I just remembered something happy. Bishop Yek quickly put away his smile and said seriously. What happy things? The Bishop of the Supreme True God asked. My niece gave birth to— Oh no, it's nothing. Ahem, let's not talk about that. Let's look around and see if there are any traces of footprints. Bishop Yek forcefully changed the topic and ordered his men to search the area carefully. Unfortunately, Reynolds was a veteran, and he had accumulated a wealth of anti-reconnaissance experience when he worked with the sheriff. Of course, he wouldn't leave any clues for others, or Undine would have caught him long ago. Thus, after a night of hard work, everyone could only return home in exhaustion. Reynolds, on the other hand, was already fast asleep. The next morning, Reynolds was not in a hurry to open the door. Instead, he went to the old bishop and showed him the tyrannical demon's heart. How much can this sell for? The old bishop looked at it carefully and shook his head. I'm afraid not much. The most valuable thing about this thing is the dark energy in it. Mages can convert it into magic power and use it to create something like a magic core. Like the red thing on Amia's stomach, it was made using a similar method. But your divine spell has purified the dark energy in it. What kind of divine spell did you use? When Reynolds heard this, his originally raised eyebrows, widened eyes, and upturned lips all drooped down. He replied in a very aggrieved tone, I'm sorry. Divine might, the old bishop almost jumped up. Didn't I say that you can't use that trick casually? I didn't use it casually. That cultist is unusually cunning and vicious. He escaped into the underground tunnel. I didn't dare to risk chasing him for fear of being ambushed, so I could only use this trick to collapse the tunnel. Reynolds spread his hands and explained. No, the old bishop was speechless. He thought to himself, with the blessing of the divine spell of protection, you can even deal with the evil god himself, and you're afraid of being ambushed by a mere cultist? Is there something wrong with my way of teaching him? Should I encourage him more in the future? The old bishop could not help but reflect in his mind. But before he could figure out how to adjust, he heard Reynolds ask, Then what about the heart? Find a place to bury it? Or feed it to the kittens? They can only drink milk now. the old archbishop said in annoyance, and then replied, "Oh, I see. Sacrifice this thing to the goddess." Offering sacrifices to the goddess was the duty of a believer. But the Mia cult was too poor in the past and had nothing to offer, and the goddess was good-tempered and gentle, so she did not care much about such things. But if there was a way, they should still make a sacrifice. However, Reynolds still asked worriedly, "What's the matter? But didn't you say that the heart is worthless? If we sacrifice it to Lady Mia, she won't blame us, right?" The old bishop explained, "It's worthless to humans, but not to the goddess. It's like money is useless to the goddess, but we need it. This is the heart of a high-level demon after all. It's a rare and precious thing. The goddess should accept it, right? But you'd better find something else of value and sacrifice it together. We're living a good life now thanks to the goddess' protection, so don't make your first sacrifice too shabby." Chapter 5:24. Following the old bishop's suggestion, Reynolds hurriedly rummaged through the church. Our church may be a little poor, but we have 9 figures of believers, and everyone has given us a lot of things. If we look carefully, we'll be able to find something. Reynolds muttered as he rummaged through the cabinets. Soon, the table in front of the old bishop was filled with various items that Reynolds had found. Toys from his childhood, beautiful pebbles from John and his son, a wooden sculpture from the old carpenter, a vase from his former neighbor, a small flower that Amelia had picked from outside, a card with an address from the dark elf lady from the weapons shop, a monocle from Baron House's nephew, and a pair of white stockings of excellent quality. These items were all part of Reynolds's beautiful memories, and they were proof of his friendship with everyone, so he had kept them. Except for the white stockings, which seemed to have been left behind by Myrthren, Reynolds had kept them well, but had not found a chance to return them to her. That's about it. Is there anything else that you think I can offer as a sacrifice? Reynolds asked seriously. This is it? The old bishop did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the various treasures that Reynolds had collected, and finally reluctantly took out the monocle. He remembered that it was a simple magical item that could be used to check the condition of an opponent, but it could only be used at a very close distance. It could only be used as a toy, and could not be put to any practical use, but it was the most valuable item in this pile of junk. It's my first time offering, but there are only 2 offerings. It's still not enough, the old bishop said with some difficulty. Not enough? Then we can only... As Reynolds spoke, his gaze fell on the little kitten beside him. The little kitten immediately sensed that something was wrong. As it mewled, it quickly ran away. Forget it. Let's add these." As the old bishop spoke, he picked out the simple slingshot, wooden figurines, and glass marbles that Reynolds had played with when he was young. After he was reborn, he had been raised by the old bishop, and the church's conditions were not good, so he only had these simple toys to accompany him through his childhood. Fortunately, Reynolds was reborn and was not very playful. Other than using the slingshot to shoot pebbles into the offering box, he did not have any other hobbies. He preferred to read quietly by himself, or listen to the old bishop tell stories about his senior. Let's leave it at that. The old bishop rubbed his eyes and placed the toy, the heart, and the monocle at the feet of the statue of the goddess. He then knelt side by side with Reynolds before the statue, reciting the doctrine and reciting the goddess's honorific name. A moment later, the statue emitted a faint white light that enveloped the 3 offerings. When the white light dissipated, the 3 offerings disappeared, and a small wooden hammer appeared at the foot of the statue. This meant that the goddess had accepted their sacrifice and was very satisfied with it. She had returned the favor. The old bishop could not help but feel a little surprised. These offerings could actually please the goddess? It seemed that he valued that demon's heart very much. He hurriedly asked Reynolds to bring the small wooden hammer back. This wooden hammer was only the size of a palm, small and cute. He couldn't tell what kind of wood it was made of. Its surface was very smooth and it felt good to the touch. Moreover, its design was very delicate. One end was a normal hammer, the other was a pick, and the end of the handle was an awl. Could be used to knock, dig, and poke. This is a gift from the goddess, a divine weapon? The goddess gave me a hammer? Reynolds held the small wooden hammer and asked cautiously. The old bishop nodded. In terms of status, this wooden hammer was of course a divine weapon, but he could not see what was so special about it. What does it do? The old bishop tried to ask. Reynolds should not have known the specific use of the wooden hammer, but after thinking carefully, a way to use it suddenly appeared in his mind. You can cast a divine spell on it and use it to make contact with other things to release the divine spell directly. As Reynolds spoke, he tried to cast a hardening divine spell that he was most familiar with on the wooden hammer. He then grabbed a small kitten that was hiding under the cabinet and gently rubbed the hammer on its head. The kitten immediately hugged its head with its two furry paws, as if it was in pain from the hammer. Then, the soft fur on its body hardened and turned into a small round hedgehog. The kitten immediately looked at Reynolds with sad eyes, as if to say, F***CKU. Reynolds hurriedly dispelled the hardening effect and rubbed it hard against his face to appease it. The kitten used the soft pads on its paws to slap his face in revenge. After releasing the kitten, Reynolds played with the small wooden hammer and said with satisfaction, "It's pretty good. In the future, when I go to the weapons shop, I don't need to do it myself. I can just use the hammer to hit it." No, there's a limit to the number of times? Reynolds carefully thought about the specific use of the hammer. For a simple divine spell like hardening, he could cast it once and the hammer could cast it 10 times. For more powerful divine spells, the number of times would be reduced. From level 5 onwards, he could only cast it once. The divine spell cast by the hammer was the same as the one he had cast himself. It was equivalent to copying the divine spell he had used before. However, a divine spell could only be copied once a day. If the previous divine spell was not used up, it would not be able to add a new divine spell to it. But the most important function of this hammer was that it could fly, and it could be directly controlled with one's mind. And the control range was up to 2 kilometers. Reynolds's mind moved, and the wooden hammer immediately flew up and danced in the air like a bee. This was a very powerful function, which meant that Reynolds could play all kinds of tricks from a distance in the future. As expected of a divine artifact, its function was very powerful. Lady Mia is too generous and too kind. Praise the goddess! Reynolds exclaimed from the bottom of his heart. But compared to the hammer's function, the old bishop was more concerned about the message the goddess wanted to convey. I've also taught you before that every action of a god has a deep meaning. The goddess gave you this wooden hammer definitely not as simple as responding to the sacrificial offering, the old bishop said seriously. You're overthinking it, aren't you? I think the goddess only gave me the hammer to protect myself because she saw that I was not talented enough and that I had to go out on an adventure. Reynolds guessed. The old bishop shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Compared to that, I think it's more likely that she wants you to use this hammer to kill your enemies when they escape into the cave. Don't use divine spells of war to smash the cave. But you have a point. I shouldn't have guessed the goddess's thoughts. This is my fault. I hope the goddess will forgive me. Chapter 525. In short, Reynolds used a demon heart that he could not sell and some other things that he had no use for in exchange for this fun divine artifact. The goddess was so generous. He immediately controlled the wooden hammer and flew in the sky to play with the kitten, familiarizing himself with the control of the hammer. He even gave the hammer a name, Blessed Hammer. But as he played, Eric suddenly came to visit. Reynolds hurriedly put the hammer away and went out to greet Eric. The old bishop had warned him not to let outsiders know about the existence of this divine artifact. It might attract the covetous eyes of criminals. It would not be too late to tell her when Eric was no longer an outsider. Die. Oh no, Bishop Eric, may the goddess protect you. Is there anything I can help you with? Reynolds greeted him formally, probably because Eric was dressed very formally today. He was back in his bishop's robe, wearing a mitre, holding a scepter in his hand, and following behind him was a follower who scattered flower petals and laid out a carpet. The only difference was that the white stockings on her legs had been replaced with a thicker one. It could no longer reveal the color of the flesh inside, but it was rounder and smoother. It looked like snow-white cream, making people want to lick it. Eric walked all the way to Reynolds and explained in a low voice, "Uncle Eric called me here. Uncle Yiku told me to come over. He wanted me to be more formal to express my respect and gratitude to you." Thanks. The modification of the divine artifact was successful. Eric's blue eyes showed a hint of joy, and he turned his head to give the follower behind him a look. The follower hurriedly carried a large box from the accompanying carriage, carried it to Reynolds, and opened it. Inside were silver candlesticks, gorgeous vases, golden cups, and other home decorations, as well as male accessories such as a pocket watch, a cane, a top hat, and so on. Every item was beautiful and exquisite, and the price would not be cheap. Eric explained in a low voice, "The slow healing of the divine artifact has been slowed down. The modified dispelling technique with a slow healing effect has been put into use. It will definitely help a lot of people and bring them good news. When more priests master this divine artifact, we will announce it to the other churches in our names. In order to thank you for your contribution, Uncle Yiku has been preparing these items for a long time." Bishop Yek had originally planned to give him money directly, but he felt that it was too vulgar. Besides, Reynolds didn't seem to be in need of money. He also noticed that Mia's church was too plain, and Renaud's attire was also very simple. Therefore, he carefully selected these decorations to enhance the appearance of the church. One could say that he put a lot of thought into it. And that wasn't all. Eric continued, "I'm sorry. Uncle Yiku also said that he hopes that you can continue to work hard and strive for more benefits for the people of the world in the future. If that's the case, he will give you a big gift." Big gift? But he didn't say what it was. He just stared at me and smiled. "In short, please allow me to represent the Church of God's Light to extend our highest respect to you. We will remember your contributions." As Eric spoke, he took a few steps back and solemnly drew an inverted 8 in front of his chest. He then bowed slightly to Reynolds in greeting. The lackeys behind her also saluted Reynolds in unison. Reynolds looked at this scene in silence. His expression was a little absent-minded, as if he saw more patients and pastors who benefited from this thanking him. Their faces were filled with smiles of happiness. "Even a person like me can help so many people. That's great." He secretly sighed in his heart. After the simple thanking ceremony, the lackeys hurriedly moved the large box into the church. Then, they left in the carriage as per Eric's instructions. After the others left, Eric heaved a sigh of relief and said softly, "That's right. I've been busy teaching the other pastors how to master this divine art. I've talked a lot, it's exhausting." There was a slight change in her originally calm tone. It sounded like she was acting coquettishly and asking for comfort. This was actually something she learned from the love strategy books. Acting coquettishly when appropriate would make her appear more adorable in the eyes of boys. For this reason, she had secretly practiced it a few times. "Will Reynolds find me more adorable?" She didn't seem to be very confident. Fortunately, Reynolds's reaction was similar to what the book said. "Feeling tired? Then why don't we not talk about the divine art today? Let's do something else to help you relax." In fact, other than giving gifts and thanking Reynolds, Eric also wanted to discuss the divine art with him. She still had many questions to ask. When she was with Reynolds, she felt very at ease. She didn't even feel tired talking. This in itself was a kind of relaxation. However, Uncle Yek said that he hoped that she and Reynolds could be closer. So, she planned to practice the knowledge in the book and test the results of her practice outside of the divine art. And Reynolds's reaction made her a little happy. According to the book, this reaction means that he cares about me, and I can take the opportunity to invite him to go to the park, hand in hand, or eat dessert together. Silently looking at each other, Eric's thoughts ran wild. She felt her cheeks heat up. But just as she was about to practice the knowledge in the book, she heard Reynolds continue. So, let's put aside the divine art today and train our bodies. Huh! This is not an option in the book? What should I do? Eric started to panic. Do you want to run together? Reynolds asked again. Eric was even more panicked.